Logos is the icon of the Father, and man is the icon of God. We are the image of God.
Dyer wave
3.
Howdy, Jay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
No, you sound pretty good, actually. It sounds like it's probably your mic.
Right window.
Cool. And do you need permissions to record on the Zoom here? Let's see.
No, because it's just going to be live on
All right, cool. So Zoom should have a backup recording, and then I have a backup recording. It should be set. Are you just streaming straight to YouTube, or are you using restream.io?
no,
or
here it is. I got it. All right, you're on here now. We have the one, the only, Mr. Richard Grove. We're live. What's up, dude?
How you doing, Jay?
Now you're frozen. That's not the one, the only. That's the frozen Richard Grove. That's
It
not,
just started snowing here, so
well, that's why you're frozen.
That's why you get frozen.
Can you sing some of the duets from Frozen? You and I can do that.
No, I don't. I actually have never seen that. I've been spared.
You're not missing anything.
I know children in the family they watch that Frozen movie, and my son might have even seen it, but I don't think I've seen it.
Can you guys hear him? Let's see.
Let's do a sound check.
Can you guys hear Richard, or are you only hearing me? Because he's frozen and choppy. Let's see. I'm coming through good for you, right? Am I coming through good for you?
Yeah, you're clear on my Zoom
Okay,
here.
shows
and
strong connection, so I'm trying to figure out why you're all frozen and choppy here.
is it just in the going to YouTube? Maybe YouTube's getting prejudiced against me.
Now you're moving. Now you're moving. You're not frozen anymore.
All right, cool. I'm glad to be thought out like Han Solo and Return of the Jedi.
Does that mean I can be Lando Calrissian, baby?
I was hoping you'd break out some of those tonight. I heard
Hello,
you do a little.
What have we here? Little bit.
I heard you do a little McConaughey last night.
We have little Richard with us.
Well, yeah. I might do a little bit of Matthew if you talk real nice to me. I might do it.
Have you seen his film, The Gentleman, that Guy Ritchie did?
No, I've not seen that one.
I've
No, wait,
watched
you're
it
talking
like
about Gentleman's Club. Yes.
No, it's just called The Gentleman,
Oh, wait.
plural. So it's Matthew McConaughey plays
Is
a
that the
cannabis
one about
dealer.
the lead?
Yeah.
Yes, I
and
did.
it opens and closes the movie with a quote, and saying that in the McConaughey voice is be very catchy.
You're right. Yes, I did. I thought it was a great film. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Some really good.
It's not one of those '90s blockbusters that you were discussing last night, though.
No, but those were more fun because I get to do the old ham schlock impersonations that I always do. Do you know you could build a career on bad impersonations?
Yeah, there's a lot of people who have done it out there, man.
So,
Yeah, you're not the
not the only
person.
one.
I don't think your impressions are hacky either, man. They're not bad.
Thank you. You're sweet.
Yeah, you do a whole bunch, and you're able to do them on demand, like when you're hosting on InfoWars and stuff. And you just throw down.
Yeah.
That's when it's really interesting, man. That's when you're growing and challenging yourself to do it on demand like that.
Well, if you don't know, dear audience, we have with us one of the premier researchers, documentary filmmakers, producer, author, the one, the only Richard Grove. You can find his work, of course, over at tragedyandhope.com. I'm trying to get your full thing squeezed, not your thing, but your full name squeezed onto the screen. We don't want to squeeze your thing onto the screen. That'd be weird. But so now we can see your name. There we go. So yes, everybody, Richard Grove, tragedyandhope.com. I know a lot of my audience is familiar with you. Maybe some are not. They're new to you. Tell us about you, what you do beyond what I just said, Richard.
Well, let's start with I grew up in Western Pennsylvania as a kid. I grew up in a rural environment. I went to public school. I went to university. I got a job in the big corporate world. I was successful to a point, and then I became a whistleblower. And then I started to discover there was history behind the things in the terrain that I was encountering that wasn't provided to me in school. And then I started, for the first time in my life, becoming a voracious reader of things that I was self-directed interest. And I learned a lot through high school, and I took years of Latin so I could do better on the SAT and that sort of, the same thing that everyone's told. And if it wasn't for me learning some skills in college, I wouldn't have been successful in the corporate world. But luckily, working my way through school paid off because I gained some skills that were useful later. And then into the research, that's when I really got to apply any aptitude that I had developed through schooling, because I didn't have a lot of books before I started encountering things off the terrain. I thought I knew what was going on. I had a degree. I was making money. What more do I need to know? I assumed I knew everything. And then I started to, learn there's more to the world than we were taught about. And then I started to try to use the internet, and I was really incredulous, and that drove my learning, but it was incredulous enough that I didn't believe the internet didn't provide the source material I needed. So I started digging into mentions of, books and trying to get the first editions of those. And that started me on a whole, trend for many years. Was like, I wanted to read the first edition of Andrew Carnegie's Triumphant Democracy or Woodrow Wilson. And, there's these quotes that circulate about these things. And a lot of the quotes, they say they're debunked. I'm like, well, if you read 8 pages and you summarize it to somebody else, though, that is an accurate description. It's just not an accurate real quote verbatim in the book, so there was a lot of nuance to be added. And from there I needed an output, so I started podcasting in 2006. I started making films in 2008. I launched an online community in 2009, and all those things are still going on today. And that book right there that you've got, Tragedy and Hope, the history of the world in our time, quite well about that, Jay. You've done long series dissecting that book. I discovered that in 2004 through a video on, I think it was Google Video. It was, I had the DVD before it was on there. It's called Brotherhood of Darkness by Dr. Stanley Monteith. And I didn't know about the story. I was like, I don't know. I don't believe this guy. I wasn't into believing things. I wanted to look up and see for sure. And sure enough, it was worse than what he said. And there was a lot more history to it than he was able to articulate. So I was glad that I was a little incredulous. And then I looked, and I find that to be a really good learning pattern to open up and see things that heretofore I probably assumed about. And assumptions and beliefs, I think we can just fill with experience and knowledge.
I think, I saw that documentary years ago on Google. I didn't really pay much attention to that book. I remember him mentioning Anglo-American establishment as well. And then I think it was probably around 2005 or 6. I heard Alex, always mentioning the book. And I thought, well, I'm just going to have to eventually get the book and read it. I remember checking it out from my university library because I was doing undergrad work and was a research assistant, and actually got actually that was in my graduate period. But I got booted out of class for having Tragedy and Hope in class one time. I was so engrossed, I was reading it. The professor said, "Why are you reading that book in my class?" And we got into a big debate, and that ended up getting me booted out of the class. So he was a diehard globalist liberal type, so didn't go over very well. But I was grateful to Alex for that recommendation. And of course, you titled your site treasureandhope.com. You have covered this book for many, many years, and so I want to thank you as well because, you know, as I told you 5 years ago, we got to do more interviews than every 5 years. But as I told you 5 years ago, you know, you had a lot of impact on me, the films that you had made. I thought that the documentary that you had made initially about psychological warfare, social engineering, that was great. Your subsequent interviews that you did with William Binney, that was great. So Richard has done a tremendous amount of work. The John Taylor Gatto. I mean, you've done so much stuff. It's hard for me to even remember all the different, you know, excellent pieces of content that you put out. But anybody in the audience, if you're not familiar with Richard, now is the time to definitely make yourself, you know, familiarize yourself with his work. So maybe just a little bit briefly about Tragedy and Hope. What's your take on the book? I know we both have covered it, but how would you summarize the importance of this book to maybe people that are new to it or kind of heard about it? Why is this such a big deal?
It's such a big deal for a couple reasons. And first off, I'll say that I don't recommend everyone read that book or read that book first, at least. It's 1,200 pages or so, depending on, like, you know, if you have a reprint, there's a couple bootlegs out there, have different page numbers. But essentially, there's a lot of words in there to hide what he's actually telling you on very few pages throughout the book. So a better place to start is Joe Plummer's Tragedy and Hope 101, or a book like Lord Milner's Second War and Sean Stone's New World Order, A Strategy of Imperialism, which is, you can get the Kindle of it, but it's way sold out. And then the Anglo-American Establishment. So let's start with Quigley and the Anglo-American Establishment, which is the first book he wrote in 1948. And it was the last book he published. It was published posthumously in 1981 by Stephen Zarlinga, who also wrote The Lost Science of Money. So Quigley gets this, he gets a whistleblower from inside Cecil Rhodes' secret society, this guy, Alfred Zimmern, and he gets the story and he doesn't publish it. He doesn't know what to do with it. But what he does for the next 20 years is he goes and studies and verifies all this stuff that Zimmern had said. So he had a manuscript in 1948, the Anglo-American Establishment, and he knew if he published it, it would end his career and possibly his life. So he didn't want to put it out. And that's why upon his death, it was published. So 20 years later, after he's in the archives of the Council on Foreign Relations and he has like the Anglo-American Establishment's own records, he writes this big, thick book in 1966 called Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time. And it goes out there, everybody's buying it, it sells out. And then he's told, and there's interesting references to how he's told that the book has no demand and there's not going to be a second printing. Really, what Macmillan Publishing did was destroyed the printing plates so they couldn't make a second publishing. And they took the second half of the book and they remarketed it as a new book called The World Since 1939, A History, or something like that, right? So they literally take the second half of the book, which you don't understand what it means unless you get the first half of the book, right? And they market that. So I do have an artifact of that, the one where they just censored it, and it's literally just like verbatim, the second part of Tragedy and Hope. So then Rudy Maxa is a New York Times reporter in 1976. He interviews Dr. Carroll Quigley, who was a professor at Georgetown's Edmund Walsh School of Foreign Service. So he trained diplomats, he trained spies, he trained people like Bill Clinton, who was a Rhodes Scholar. Quigley himself was mentored by a Rhodes Scholar. And these are all people in the vein of Cecil Rhodes who want to bring America back into the opium dealing British Empire. So that's the main goal. So Quigley writes this book, he gets it out there, they censor it, they tell him, and he says in the interview that they lied to him. So that's a conspiracy right there. The people that Quigley's working with, they lied to him, you know? And then they asked about Lionel Curtis, who's a main figure in Anglo-American Establishment. And that's where Quigley says, we can't talk about him, we'd lose our career or worse. And he says, turn off the tape recorder. And the end of the meeting happened. That's the end of the interview. So it's an interesting story. And then at some point, Monteith had bootlegged it And then at some point, some people took a couple key pages out of it. Though all the places that I've checked, Amazon with the GSG publishing 2004, the republished, the one you have right there, that has all the pages, and the carolquigley.net site, also the e-copy, the PDF now has all the pages, though it didn't at one time. And we were like, hey, what's up? And they're like, oh, we didn't know. And we like, okay, here's the whole thing. And they published it. So most everything you get out there now is uncensored. And then there's key passages in there, of course, which are especially illuminating. I think that like when I read pages like it was 50 and 52 where he's talking about Montague Norman, the Bank of England, the Rothschild family, that's where it became real for me, is when I saw it in Tragedy and Hope. Because before then it was just like an internet rumor.
Yeah,
and I was like, I went to 5 years of a good university, and if they existed, I would have known. I read the Wall Street Journal. Somebody would have told me along the way, but no. And then there's a deep history to that family. And so I started acquiring their biographies and autobiographies, and then, started reading into that history that we don't know about.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of the recommendations, stuff that you talked about, kind of launched me, Corbett as well, Alex, into really getting my hands on the physical copies. This was something that you said a long time ago that I always jived with because, it was kind of obvious to see if you'd read books like Fahrenheit 451 where they were going to try to go with digitizing everything and people not actually reading books. And this was something that again was part of all these dystopian stories. We knew they were going to get rid of books, and so that's why it's so crucial to have the physical copies, is that they probably will be some kind of valuable commodity in the future if they're even allowed. So yes, I embarked on that same kind of a journey. I've always loved books, but I decided I'm gonna have to collect these global elite books. And so in the past 5 years since you were on, what we've done over here on my end of things is 50 or so lectures based on the top global elite books. So we did, of course, the Quigley set. Then we branched out and we did Brzezinski, we did Tim Leary, we did Rockefeller, we've done Fritjof Capra, we've done Schwab, we've done all these different characters. And one thing that you start to notice when you go through about 50 of these is that there is a coordinated strategy. There is a coordinated plan. It's what Quigley's talking about. It's the same continuity of agenda over this and it's longer than a century, but I just stick to the 20th century typically to make it simple. And it's what we see in those dystopian stories like Brave New World, like 1984. It's the creation of this final revolution. Now, some of the key ones that I've gotten into would be, obviously the more obvious ones like Between Two Ages, or the Rockefeller's biography, David's memoirs, these kinds of things. But there's always a gem or two that is obscure. So every time I've talked to you, you've always thrown out some really awesome gems that I don't know about, because this is a never-ending rabbit trail. There's always a new, global elite book. But what are a couple that you think, like I always tell people, if you can get a hold of something like Miles Copeland's Game of Nations, that's a classic one, because people overlook that. They think, oh, he's just like a CIA operative. What's he going to say that's interesting? Well, he actually ends the book talking about how everything that they were doing in Syria and Egypt was to integrate it into the global order according to the plan of Bertrand Russell. So here you have this random CIA operative's narrative of what he was doing in his operations, and it's all part of the same plan. So what are a couple books, Rich, if you would, that you recommend that probably a lot of people don't know about?
Do you have a specific part of the spectrum in mind?
Anything that you think. Like, I'm just kind of looking at my shelf and I'm saying, probably a lot of people haven't read Game of Nations. Probably a lot of people didn't read Soldiers of Reason. Probably a lot of people didn't read, Kessler's Ghost in the Machine. Anything like that you think would be, like, if you were to say, like, what are the key... We know about Tragedy and Hope. We know about Anglo-American establishment. What do I need to be aware of?
All right. So what you need to be aware of is, once upon a time, America fought against Britain, and we separated, and then they had a plan that they tried to take us back in 1812 and burn the White House, and that didn't work militarily. And then slowly, during the 1800s, they go and focus on subjugating India and China with the opium trade. And then they come back over here in the 20th century, and they refocus from Conan Doyle coming up with the idea and publishing it, to Cecil Rhodes codifying it and leaving a last will and testament to fund, bringing America back into the British Empire and creating the Rhodes Scholars and other various groups like the Pilgrim Society was a legacy group, the Council on Foreign Relations, Bilderberg, Trilateral, World Economic Forum. They're all working groups in that same, what you were just saying. And so they were playing something traditionally called the Great Game. And then that was with the German royal family, the Russian royal family, their cousins, basically. But then they wore them all out through World War I, no more of them. So they got to get strong with their, ex-cousin, their sibling, or however you want to describe it, America. That's the new Great Game. That's where guys like Miles Copeland come in, because he's part of the OSS turned CIA. And all they did was British intelligence led the Americans around by the nose. And they're like, here's how to do everything. And they were masters of spycraft. And they mastered that not in the 20th century, but in the 1700s and 1800s with the East India Company and the Rhodes Diamonds guys and those types of kind of black market outside of the spectrum of fairness and law and jurisdiction. It was just pillage and plunder and slavery, and those types of things were giving them a lot of power behind the scenes. British people were fine with that because this happened in China, it's happening in India, it's happening in Africa, wherever this is going on. But the Copeland bunch, they start America really. So you can look at Rhodes's buddy Kipling in 1898, who writes The White Man's Burden and says America should be not isolationist and get into the Spanish-American War, which America did. So a similar thing happens 50 years later during World War II, where Copeland's part of this team, and he's one of the bridge guys of the Anglo-American establishment. He's like, I don't know if he was X2 on the American side or, if he was part of the double cross system on the British side, but they have, I'll explain that infrastructure in a second. But basically what the British were getting us to do was go into these countries and do overthrows and learn how to do assassinations and, replace the rulers, because they wanted us to become the new property managers of the British Empire. And they had to go around and show us how to do that. So we're in Afghanistan today. It's the longest war in American history. The British had a first, a second, and a third Anglo-Afghan war over there, man. They've been at it for a long time. Now we're just like the front lines. And then there, you could even look at older monarchies behind the British, like the Dutch and some of the other ones in the Northern Europe that have been around a little bit longer and had these things set up even earlier and kind of handed that power off to the British at some point. So there's a royalty layer that believes in, slavery and might makes right. And then there's a group of people around that support that historically, and it's multi-generational. And what you're talking about around World War II, what are the most important books and all of that? I got some. I'd start with Ian Fleming, this guy here.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Right? Let's see if I can get that zoomed out. Right. So then I got double cross, this one. This one you got to read. William Stevenson, about William Stevenson. So a man called Intrepid, but his name's William Stevenson, but it's not the same William Stevenson who's writing the book. So that one's a little confusing, right. But these are all the same thing. Double cross, the double cross system. The irregulars right here. This is one I just recommended to Corbett because this is the British spy ring in America. And they're doing assassinations. So when you get into how did OSS get created, how did CIA get created, and you get a whole bunch of documents, and some of these things say that like Ian Fleming helped to draw up the blueprints for the CIA. Yeah, and it was like that close. I know that Camp David used to be an assassination training camp. Yep. I know that Fleming and these guys went to Camp X, which was an assassination training camp over the border in Canada. They were acting against Americans during wartime. So the special relationship and all that entails, the destroyers for bases, and basically in the 20s after World War I, they did a lot of changing our history books to make it more pro-British and British friendly. And that was like the Hands Across America movement. And that's what the Pilgrim Society and those groups were trying to do to ameliorate themselves to America. And they changed their name to a Commonwealth. So it wasn't an empire anymore. They got this Commonwealth. And that was, I think, Lionel Curtis, Columbia lectures. Curtis,
exactly. The Commonwealth of God.
Yeah, exactly. So any of the books in that area that start to help illustrate, but the guy, William Stevenson, this guy here, he was the top British spy in America, running guys like Wild Bill Donovan. Yep. So the creation, and his name's probably not even really William Stevenson because he had a dark. So just like Wild Bill Donovan he had a whole bunch of different families and names, and he was a pretty out there dude. He wasn't your average human being going around doing that type of spycraft. Same thing with Stevenson, the man they called Intrepid. And they were housed in Rockefeller Center. They were put up there by Nelson Rockefeller. So like the Anglo-American establishment was together on that whole thing.
That's what pushing us into war. Rockefeller's next, exactly.
Yeah, for sure. But the fact that the British were able to come over and have that much, and that GCHQ is 50 years ahead of NSA at any given time, and they were tapping the transatlantic cable back in the day, and all, so it was interesting to learn. And also I did similar reading on the Soviet system too, but that's all Western banker kind of created and funded too. So I know your buddy Mark does all that research on the Soviets, right?
Hackers is pretty solid on that. Three of the things he's translated to vindicate a lot of kind of what we would have suspected, a lot of the Quigley style analysis, which was that people like Victor Rothschild were playing both sides, the Soviets and British intelligence during that time period. People like Ghislaine Maxwell's dad, Robert Maxwell, playing both sides, being this kind of, middleman between both sides, trying to play both sides. And that, of course, led probably to his demise, but his assassination.
I look at you're absolutely right. I have a video with Victor Rothschild because I have the book The Fifth Man by Roland. I forget his name. And one of my students asked if I had ever seen the interview with the author. I was like, no, I haven't. So send it over. That Cambridge spy ring. I mean, just look at the fact that Kim Philby wasn't like, he's in charge of it, right? And they say he's a communist spy. But who was his dad? His dad was St. John or St. John Philby, who was embedded with the Arabs and went native. And so MI6 said that they had basically disavowed him and he was off the reservation. But I found pay stubs from after they said that while he's serving, and he's setting up Mujahideen in 1928, and he's setting up the Saudi royal family.
Right.
So like when bin Laden comes around on 9/11 to attack America, and you understand bin Laden, like who are his teachers and where did they come from and who are the family's business partners? There's way too many connections. I mean, direct connections, like his brothers with the ex-president on the day of, and the other brothers doing business through James Bath with George W. Bush, and they were just connections all over the place. And that's not the random thing they tell everyone to believe. So my whole thing is like they give the public a caricature, a cartoon.
Right.
And real life has a lot more detail and nuance, and it's so much more interesting and fascinating if you're not attached to thinking you already know how it happened. Because you need that genuine curiosity to learn.
Right. I remember, I think it was when I was reading Servando Gonzalez, the way he put it, once he put it like the CIA OSS, that kind of a thing, if you understand them more like the private army of the banking families, it's a much better way to understand it. And it removes a lot of the mystique, right? Of like, oh, James Bond's out there, like, saving the West from the commies and from Spectre and all this stuff. Now, if you understand rather that he's working for Spectre, it actually makes a lot more sense than the kind of, narratives that Hollywood gives, which was part of the psychological warfare and propaganda. That's why Ian Fleming was so, successful and closely tied to Hollywood and all this, was that he was, helping to craft that narrative of, the super spy saving the West from, the made up enemies all over the world, basically, which are, I mean, in a sense, at a level, yes, they are enemies. But the problem is that at a higher level, we just constantly seem to run into the fact that there's really, really wealthy people, fabulously wealthy people that seem to basically be beyond any kind of nation state or ideological commitments. And so in that way, they're able to play a bigger chessboard, right? If you're not ideologically committed, or you don't have any ties to, something like a nation or something like that, or to principles, then you're able to kind of play the game, the great game, in any way you want. So it's merely a power play. And that allows you to basically, depart from any notion of ethics, any notion of right and wrong. And that's what leads to so much, I think, of the geopolitical degeneracy. But that's just the way of the world, right? That's the history of the world, unfortunately, in a fallen world. But I'm rambling, Richard. Let's get back to what you want. You've got something pulled up there. What is it?
I wanted to illustrate your point. You were saying that these guys who run MI6, a lot of times they're the front. The people who are running intelligence are front people for the bankers. So I had at one point modeled out the history of MI6 and the various awesome. The people who ran it and what they did behind the scenes. And one of these guys.
Okay, let me zoom in on what you're showing there.
Maybe
go ahead.
I'm looking. I was trying to find a couple of them came directly from De Beers. So if I just type in De Beers real quick,
So we've got like the diamond mining, the Rhodes.
yeah. So I
Trust,
saw
yeah.
them. I saw them go from De Beers. Let's see, Debers. I saw him go from like working for Cecil Rhodes Diamond Mining Company to running MI6, and I guess I have it at DE space E. Let's try that. De Beers Diamonds, and if I pull that up, then we should see one of these guys. Maybe it was Merriman. Oh, Masterman. Oh, the guy who did the double cross committee. Let's see.
Okay.
Yeah, he worked for De Beers Diamond Company at some point in his history. And maybe so did Percy Silito. So a couple of these guys who were running MI6. So I just went through all the directors, and you can get most of this still on Wikipedia just to get the history and dig into the primary sources because they're pulling them from British sites. But yeah, so that's the gist of it. You start asking the questions like, when was MI6 created? Who created it? Who have been the spy masters as they go through? And you were talking about the dystopian authors a little bit ago. So I wanted to point out, it's like Malthus and Darwin and T.H. Huxley back in the 1800s promoting this idea of eugenics and also technocracy, technopoly, right? That whole philosophy on biology is backed by the Fabian socialists because there's a lot of overlaps between those groups. And then as you're going through, you got, let's see, who is the oldest one? So T.H. Huxley was an acolyte of Darwin, and then T.H. Huxley mentored H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells mentored Aldous Huxley, and Aldous Huxley was a mentor at one point to George Orwell. So there is a chain of continuity between the Fabian socialists, and H.G. Wells had said he was in their meetings, and he's in these roundtable group meetings and things like that he says in his books and his experiment on biography or autobiography, the 2-volume set. He talks about that stuff in there. So the Fabian socialists, the wolves in sheep clothing, that idea is still present today with Klaus Schwab and the continuity of power that has led from the beginning of the 20th century all the way till now. It's a small finite planet. There's only so many people working on these things. And they made themselves known to those who will look it up and read about it. But they're not going to tell you on TV.
Yeah, I mean, you go back to 1970, and it's not Brzezinski that invents the idea of technocracy. As you know, this goes back to Plato. It goes back to the ancient Greeks. They had the idea of quantification and a kind of mathematical regimentation of all of society into these rigid
Well, it's good to run armies. Look how the Romans built roads and did all that good civilizing around the world because they were able to figure out how to feed people on the road.
And then we come to the teens and 20s, and you've got the idea from kind of the Saint Just, Saint Simon, these different Comte, these social theorists out of France, influenced by the Weishaupt and the communitarians, the communists, that we can basically technocraticize society, that it can be run in a purely rational way. And so then you get, of course, the ideas of the panopticon and all that with Bentham. I'm not going to rehearse all that, but into the 20s.
No, but Bentham, he worked for the East India Company,
Exactly,
and so
right.
did Malthus, and they worked for the East India Company, the university,
But when we
educating
get to the 20s and 30s, that's when we start to have this idea of technocracy. Then we come up into the 70s, and what do you think it is about Brzezinski that really captures the imagination of David Rockefeller? David Rockefeller spots Brzezinski. He reads this book and he says, "Make this guy in charge of Trilateral Commission."
Oh, okay. All right. So there's an interesting lineage of all of that. Have you ever read the Sean Stone New World Order book?
I have not read Sean's book yet. No.
This thing? All right. They're coming out with the second edition, and we're updating it for what's going on right now with Klaus Schwab, because Klaus Schwab was a protege of Henry Kissinger. Okay.
That makes sense.
And yeah, right, at Harvard. So Henry Kissinger was he was Nelson's pick, and they found him kind of after World War II, and he seemed to help them with paperclip and some of these ash can and dustbin projects and the other things going on over in Europe. So Kissinger got himself in, and Nelson Rockefeller was running Psychological Warfare Bureau, PWB, in Europe for World War II before doing his other things after World War II. He was running psychological operations. So Kissinger gets in with him. David Rockefeller, who's mentored by Friedrich Hayek, and von Mises is brought to the United States by the Rockefeller Foundation, right? So David Rockefeller, he finds Zbigniew Brzezinski, and I'm pretty sure he finds him not from his book, but a couple years earlier.
Oh, McGill, when he was at McGill.
At McGill, okay. And then didn't he also do a stint at Harvard before he wrote the book, maybe?
That sounds right.
And then as far as that goes, so a guy like Machiavelli is no different than a guy like Brzezinski. He says there's a power structure. How do I write something to serve those guys? What problems are they seeking to solve? And how can I add to that, right? So they're trying to get close to power. So what Brzezinski says is he's got his Eastern European, like Polish, Soviet kind of experience, and he sees the flaws in that type of communism and overt surveillance. And he's like, here's how we can do it bigger, better without being so intrusive on a scale that Joseph Stalin and the Stasi never thought they could do. And he writes a series of books. There's Between Two Ages, and then there's the USA, USSR, and then there's there's The Choice. I got 5 or 6 of his books down here. But he's somebody's tool. He was always somebody's tool. And he's the guy in 1979 when Jimmy Carter says, let's hire the Mujahideen and train Osama bin Laden. Zbig's the one over there doing the deed. So between Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski, the Rockefeller brothers had their front men who could always be present in all these meetings. Look how long Kissinger's made it through all these administrations, and people still listen, Mr. President.
People listen to whatever, Mr. Kissinger, Mr. President.
Yeah, so he's a fixture, and quickly said that. He's like, no matter who's in the White House, the policy's not changing. These people have a goal, and he's not even saying that he, was against the goal. He just had an aversion to them keeping it secret because he knew if it wasn't secret, people could actually do something maybe against it.
Right.
So that was the struggle back in the day.
By the way, big night tonight. Almost 600 live, which is really good for us. So if you would, be sure and smash that like button. Be sure to drop your super chats via Streamlabs. Of course, we don't have monetization anymore, but if you want to use super chats, you can still through Streamlabs there in the chat. All right.
So I got to use Streamlabs because I was on your stream last night and I was trying to do a super chat. I'm like, it must just be me on this iPad because I couldn't figure it out. But I see
you have to click on the link and then it pulls up a separate page, and then you put in your super chat on a separate Streamlabs page for me, and then it shows up in my Streamlabs OBS. So it's cool. Like one extra step process in the way it used to be, but at least
audience doesn't mind, man.
Streamlabs doesn't take 30% like YouTube, so actually it's better in the long run.
That's good, yeah. I've never done the super chat on YouTube. I'm monetized, but I demonetize all my stuff, so I fly right below the radar, kind of, because I still have that ability, but I don't use it. So they're not looking to scan my stuff for
right. That's a good point. Actually, I think it has been better to be demonetized because I've made up for it now. The Streamlabs actually basically evens out with what super chats used to be. But anyway, let's talk about what would you say to this point about the steering committees, right? So this is something that a lot of people don't understand, and you're definitely knowledgeable in this area. These are modeled on these Royal Society type groups, Royal Institute for International Affairs, right? The different, it's the idea of the round table, right? Like the Knights of the Round Table, except that the wise men of the modern world now sit around these tables. I even have the book over there, The Wise Men, right?
I have it right here. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just moved it. It's on that shelf. Walter Isaacson.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this is the idea of these kind of the bloods and the brains, right? We've got the old money. Got new money, and then we've got the brains that kind of plan the future. Why do you think that they are so dead set on this technocratic plan? What do you think it was is it just because that's the best means of control? What got us from, nation states and kings and this kind of stuff to let's have an AI technocratic government that runs everything on the basis of austerity?
I think the idea of trying to control the world has been around for a long time, since Alexander the Great and other dudes like that. So they have always been seeking to use technology and develop it not for our betterment, but to kind of control people. And then they show us here's here's the good parts of your tracking device. But at the end of the day, it's like the stool pigeons from the Gulag Archipelago. And people who read volume 3, you understand what you got to do with those surveillance things, man, if you want to be free. So there's a way that, that we have developed tech. So the example I would use is this. There's a popular documentary called The Social Dilemma. And in there, they talk to a bunch of former Silicon Valley executives who are big muckety mucks and early on in those companies. They're all asked a question about what the problem is, because they can name all the symptoms and how it's not good, but they don't know what the problem is. And so they're all left stumped. And the answer to the question is there are some people on this planet who decided to use technology to take away our freedom. And then they get a buffer of that technology and they withhold it from us through national security or whatever you want to call it. And they use that knowledge gap, which is a power gap, which is an information gap, which is also a money gap. And that gap is how they control. So the more that we can do to be creative, inventive, use our innovation and ingenuity to make their systems obsolete instead of trying to fight their systems, I think we're going to be better off, and we're going to be more autonomous. We're going to be more self-reliant. We're going to be easier to work with, and it's going to be easier for us to communicate our needs to others peacefully without trying to take away their freedom.
One area where I was wrong in, say, 5 or 6 years ago was I was very skeptical of Bitcoin from the outset. And then about 2016, 2017, I totally changed my mind on the potential for Bitcoin and those kinds of assets. But I don't know actually your position. Do you have a take on Bitcoin? I mean, I know obviously anything like that could be used for evil blockchain technology. Klaus makes a big deal in his book out of blockchain. But I tend to think that given the way they're going with where they're going to take all this money printing, quantitative easing, it really only makes sense to have hedges like gold and Bitcoin. What do you think?
I've always been skeptical. I'm still skeptical now.
Okay.
So let me put it this way. In 1996, MIT published a paper called How to Make a Mint, and it was about cryptocurrency, and it was like NSA and MIT. And they were basically calling for what Bitcoin became soon thereafter. Bitcoin, when you look into the who, what, where, when, why, and how of how that was created, Satoshi Nakamoto, man, see no more, right? It's like, it's there. You don't know who created it. 60% of it has never been transacted. Who's holding those wallets? So there's a whole lot about that system I don't understand. And when I tried to inquire into it, not a lot of answers. So I never built up trust in it, right? And I've known people that have been in Bitcoin since like it started pretty much. And there was a time in 2014, Bitcoin was like $100 and I had 2 of them. And so I sent my last 2 Bitcoins at that time to my buddy, Drew Phillips, who makes t-shirts and bumper stickers. And I got some bumper stickers, 100 of each design. And now those bumper stickers are like worth $40,000. So when I send them to people who are fans of mine, they really appreciate, like they get one of those pieces of my erroneous economic history. I have a little bit of Bitcoin now because some people pay for stuff over the years, and I don't really transact in it, but I don't have a Bitcoin for sure. It's a fraction of a Bitcoin, and I don't really keep track of that at all.
Okay. I wasn't sure what your take on it was. It was just an area where, initially when I think I wrote an essay back in 2015 where I was really skeptical of it. And then over time I got, playing with it, testing it, playing around, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I was skeptical, but I also played with it. I had a couple different wallets. I heard horror stories from people who got ripped off, who lost their wallets, those sort of things. And I never had that much flowing around to worry about or deal with. So I experimented. I bought a couple things, and I don't know what the price is at now, but I know a couple weeks ago it was up near 20.
Yeah, today was the all-time high. It's 21.5 today. Ooh. But maybe briefly, I know we're a little bit off track, but you're such a well-rounded, knowledgeable dude. I hate to bypass some of the more basics for the audience, but what would you say to people who ask you, Richard, you do talk a lot about economics and economic theory and education. Why are we so miseducated on economics? And what are the basic problems with the fiat system that we have?
Well, one of the problems is that we graduate schooling without knowing how to balance a checkbook, what money is. And you would learn about money from reading a book like The Lost Science of Money, which was 26 case studies of money through history. And then you could see kind of how we're using it today and how it's pieces of these other things, plus some new stuff they just made up and threw in there. And so there's a misunderstanding of what money is, what money can do. Some people think that money is the root of all evil, and I think it's properly quoted. The love of money and money alone would be the root of all evil, for sure. And there are people like that out there. But most people I know, they're struggling for money. They need to keep a roof over their head, keep their kids fed. These are more challenging times than ever. And so I think it is a useful, life-giving tool in many situations, and people should know how to go make an offer to the market and be able to either get paid for their skills or barter their skills through agorism or something like that, and to find a way to meet their needs so that they can go forward. So from there, the fiat currency system happened. They took us, they really took us off the gold standard, or off the standard, in 1913 with the Federal Reserve, because Congress has as in the Constitution, Congress can coin money, but they don't have the ability to print money. And they certainly can't outsource this to a private group of bankers who legitimately conspired, hid their identities because they knew they were doing things wrong, and changed the shape of our nation. And then from there, you've got fractional reserve lending that goes in there. And, the fiat money is by law. Fiat means by law, and it's not necessarily nomisma, as the Greeks called it, or some sort of store of currency, store of value over time, like precious metals have traditionally been. And today, what they want is Bank for International Settlements has a new cryptocurrency for central banks. And where they're going with all this is that they want to make it illegal for you to own encryption keys or have direct access to any of this stuff. And they now want to broker all this stuff that was meant to make people free and independent. They've slowly crept in, and they've got their own coins, their own blockchains, these sort of things. So at the same time that there's people using blockchain to track inventory and do all these sorts of things because it's a public ledger technology, there's other groups that are seeking to, like, let's make everything digital and get rid of cash. And I think that's one of the many fallacies that Klaus has in his book. One of them is that he thinks the answer is a digital cryptocurrency, and yet at the same time he's saying, "Oh, the internet is so dangerous, and it's so easy for terrorists." And they're running the World Economic Forum's running the newer exercise called Cyber Polygon, which would be like a dark winter if they took out the grid and the internet and cut people off. Because, like, unlike you and me, we have books. We understand, if we had to read our books, we're cool. Without the internet, we could learn about the world and interact with it. But most people don't know, they wouldn't know where to start if they get cut off from the internet. And so arguing that the internet's cryptocurrency is a solution, but the internet's not a tenable resource, it's like, that doesn't make sense. He says globalism has failed, and yet globalism is the solution. He offers kind of a false trilemma in there. He's got some fallacies. He says that during the lockdowns, carbon dioxide did not decrease from people being home and locked in. So that means us driving our cars, us doing whatever is not the problem. It's big industry, it's militaries, it's those type of entities that never shut down during the lockdowns, right? So they're basically saying we're going to have to lock down harder, when that's not the solution to that either. And by the way, plants love carbon dioxide. They love it. They eat it up.
Yeah, I saw this largely as economic warfare. I did a video some months ago when all this Karanka was new, and my video was just talking about it being a form of economic warfare. I mean, there's other things that go along with it: psychological warfare, conditioning, getting you to go along to submitting to all the most ridiculous things they say. That's part of the thing in 1984, right? Doesn't Smith make Winston do ridiculous things just to see if he'll do them? Yeah. Excuse me.
Yeah, I think
O'Brien
yeah. And that's what they want. They want people to LARP. They want you to live action role play, which is to bear false witness. They and that's how they break. If you go back to like Richard Condon's Manchurian Candidate, where they're doing brainwashing in North Korea, that's how they start, and that's how they did a dude like John McCain. They get you to sign a piece of paper that is 99% true, but has one lie in there. And instead of getting beat, you'll just sign that. And then the next day, and now a paragraph is false, but you'll still do that. And then they'll have you singing whatever song they want you to, because it's a series of incremental steps. And that's what they do. That's what advertisers on those big corporate media channels depend on. If they pay a bunch of money to shape the news like this, they'll shape your behavior slowly over time, right? And that's essentially what it is. Those people pay for those news channels, those advertisers, because they want control of those audiences, and they play those audiences like fools. It's not a respectful, loving relationship, nurturing, or anything like that.
Now, a big thing that comes up in the Global Elite book series is MK Ultra. Maybe not so much from the primary documents, although it does come up in some of the writings of the elite here and there. They're kind of reference it. I think that it played a pretty big role, obviously, in social engineering, things like that. But again, because you're such a kind of broad mind Renaissance type of dude, how would you characterize the relevance of MK Ultra if somebody just asked you at kind of a basic level?
In the 1800s, they didn't have a real strong understanding of how human beings worked. And then by the end of the 1800s, they start to develop the behavioral conditioning techniques of Pavlov and going into the 20s with Skinner and Watson. And by the 30s, these eugenics, Fabian socialist people, they got some ideas. They want to do some experiments. They want to learn more, but they have boundaries. So they experiment ideas from Cold Spring Harbor, Long Island, make their way over to a young Adolf Hitler and his group of National Socialists, where these Western bankers are pouring in money. That's why we had a Great Depression here. American finance was going over there. Why? Because their economy got crushed after the Treaty of Versailles and these penalties. Mm-hmm. So it was really easy to go in and buy all the infrastructure, right? So they have armaments. They have arming with philosophy and scientific eugenic knowledge of making a pure race and all that type of stuff. And afterwards, those people who funded those projects, they bring it back, but they know they have to rebrand it because Hitler gave it a bad name. Right?
Exactly.
So there's a Dr. Lily Kay from MIT, and she wrote a book, The Molecular Vision of Life. Rockefeller, Caltech.
By the way, shout out to you for promoting that, and my buddy Tristan, who he read that book. He got really deep into it. He got me hip to that, but that came from you, so shout out to you for that.
I'm giving shout out to Kevin Cole because he told John Taylor Gatto about that in between taping of the Ultimate History lesson, and that's where I learned about it. I was like, I got to get that. But it just shows how the Rockefeller family rebranded. In molecular biology is a very respectable industry today. That's where you get mRNA viruses, all these, vaccines, these things that they're doing. It's all in that same line of development. And Thomas Watson, who ran IBM. He was a eugenicist. He was a buddy of Hitler. He came up with those Hollerith numbers that they put on the Jews. Mm-hmm. That was an inventory system, so he could process them through the computer with their little punch cards. Mm-hmm. Edwin Black wrote the IBM and the Holocaust book. There's another one with it. But basically, this is very well known that eugenics and technocracy were kind of joined back then. And the way that Neil Postman writes it, technopoly is totalitarian technocracy. So when it's not just tech, it's like these people are in control and they're not asking anymore. They're just in control. So that's what he coined in his book, Technopoly, which was like 1992, because he kind of saw these things coming. He also wrote Amusing Ourselves to Death. He was a brilliant writer. So the idea of technopoly, it fits right in with the idea of eugenics and race purification and those silly ideas those people came up and promoted, and they still promote them today. There's a long chain that led to Bill Gates and what he's doing today and his interests. And, you know, he couldn't stop viruses off our computers for 20 years, but now he's got it down for first time on a new virus and nothing to see here. Just take it.
Right. So it would seem like The View, there's a good book about World as Laboratory by Rebecca Lemov, and she gives this attitude of how the elite view the world like it's a way to do experiments. She has a section on culture in there as well, where the idea was really to master the inner man and the outer world. And in my view, really the long-term goal is to rewrite the whole of everything, right? Changing image of man, not just man's view of himself, but the external world, and then literally to kind of rewrite the external world. And that's really where Klaus takes us. Now, there had been some recent global elite books that did talk about this kind of stuff. Brief History of the Future by Jacques Attali. We did a whole talk on that. But he wrote that back in 2006. And, I remember even a couple years ago, if you talked about the kind of stuff that Klaus put in Fourth Industrial Revolution, it was your crazy conspiracy theorist still, even 2 or 3 years ago. But it was already in, Brief History of the Future by Attali, the Kissinger of France, right? All there, everything, even to the global brain, even to everybody being linked into the matrix, even to, everything being controlled by a central AI. But, that's still just, theory. No, it's not theory. It's actually what the plan has been. And then we got this big confirmation with our buddy Klaus. You have done a deep dive into Klaus. I want to give you the floor. What do we need to know about Klaus?
All right, Klaus Schwab's an interesting character. He's like a professional academic his whole life. He got married in around 1971. In the same year, he created the World Economic Forum. And a couple years later, they start calling it Davos. They have a manifesto. They have a von Habsburg. They have a former SS officer, Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. Yeah, and then they have Aurelio Perche, who created the Limits to Growth for the Club of Rome, which was the original population control document that led to UNCED and Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030. And Klaus says in the Reset book that if they don't use this crisis now to push through carbon and all this other stuff, they might not get it through. It's like they're using it to jumpstart things that were dead. Like vaccines had there was protests against vaccine in Connecticut before the COVID kicked off because they were trying to take away religious exemptions and they were trying to make it mandatory. And so there was already a whole bunch of pushback, and some people had won some lawsuits that were very damning. So the CDC, the WHO were on the ropes. The UN group was on the ropes before COVID. Globalism had failed. Carbon, this wasn't all going to work out, but it's somehow with COVID, all these other things, it's making their dream wish list, Santa Claus list come true. And they're able to like kick the ball through the uprights, no problem. And everybody's in lockstep through this whole thing. And there's a long history behind those Rockefeller Foundation scenarios that they write up and these sort of things. So Klaus, he's run a group of it's a network of world corporations. It's like the front end of the New World Order, all those big corporations that are on board with the manifesto that they have. And it's about transhumanism, technopoly, and total tyranny. It's not independent people having rights. It's not people working freely with each other or voluntarily. It's, nobody's going to be allowed to eat meat. You can have meat once a year, these sort of things. You'll own nothing by 2030. Well, I got a problem with that because if you don't own your body and you can't have property, then you are property, historically speaking.
Somebody owns you, right?
Yeah. And somebody's going to own stuff. I guarantee it. That's how it is in all those dystopian books. Whether it's O'Brien or who's the guy in Brave New World?
Mustafa Mond.
Yeah. They have access to everything. They got the art, they got the psychedelics, they got whatever, but those, you can't have those as the real people, the individual people out there. They got to, think that Big Brother is real and, Manuel Goldstein, all these sort of things. So, yeah, there's always been a divide between the elites, and the internet was like the opportunity to really level the playing field. And I think right now they've artificially moved their goals 10 years forward. So the things that they had planned by doing 2030, they're trying to slam those things in right now because they also know there's a growing resistance and that by coming out and decloaking a little early. But I think it's just like General Veers when he came out of Lightspeed too early and he warns the planet of Hoth and the rebels, Darth Vader has to deal with them, but it doesn't work out so well. The rebels escape, and I think we can do that with leaps in technology. Our leap to Lightspeed to leave the Empire behind right now can be technology and the ability to have indelible printing on the web. If they can't have the censorship, if they can't have censorship, then they can't propagandize effectively. So they censor for a couple years. Since the last election, they censored everybody who would have any type of dissent, and now they can propagandize, and people believe it. And they had a plan, and they're doing pretty well at it. But the game ain't over yet.
Now, there's a great chapter. I want everybody, if you're not familiar with this book, this is, of course, David's memoirs, and probably there's multiple very telling chapters.
The 505?
The China chapter is very telling because you get the impression that David knew all along that this was really kind of a dialectic, and that's why later on in chapter 27 he says that the communist menace wasn't that much of a menace. That's what he says. Now, why would he say that? I thought we were, weren't the Rockefellers involved in all these cold? Yeah, because it's a scam, right? Now,
yeah, they could fly into Russia anytime they wanted. Arm and Hammer, all these big industrialists from the New World Order could fly back and forth, and they knew, and they propped up Papa Joe Stalin like he was like FDR, and he had committed some real atrocities by that time in 1945 at the Yalta Conference and those types of things. Like the Death Bar starvation campaign that if people know about the Holocaust, you should know about the Holodomor, where he starved like 39 million people death by starvation, which is the most disgusting and dishonorable way that people can die. It's like, it's awful.
Well, then you get what's your take on Quigley discusses when Stalin rejects the Marshall Plan aid, this kicks off the Cold War, right? And that is the official dating of the Cold War. Have you read by the way, are you familiar with that Wim Hof book that's pretty recent?
No.
Oh, you should get this. This is one you'll want. It's a Time Life magazine, John Courtney Murray and the American Proposition. It's about how the CIA was buying off. He's a famous, well-known Catholic lawyer, so he's not I'm not taking his side, but he's basically just analyzing what happened with the CIA and the Jesuits in Vatican II, and then how they basically bought the Jesuits and the Americanist arm of basically to make the Roman Catholic Church to promote this global Americanism is what happened at Vatican II. John Courtney Murray was the point man for the elite to do that. He was more or less co-opted by the CIA to do that.
Well, and who was the Dallas?
I'm sorry, David Wim Hof, WEMHOFF.
David Wim Hof.
It's an excellent book. Very, very important for the whole global elite stuff.
Avery Foster Dulles became a cardinal
Correct.
for the Vatican,
Yep.
and John Foster ran
related
the
to
World
the
Council of
Dulleses.
Churches. And there was another. There was a whole bunch of
multiple
while Bill
chapters on
Donovan
those guys.
worked with the Vatican. There was a whole
Right.
bunch of those guys, for sure.
Now, what basically Wim Hof gets at is that the Rockefellers, and Brzezinski mentions it too in Between Two Ages, that the idea was that we need to commandeer that church because of its numbers, because of its size. Best way to do that is to capture the mind of their intellectuals. And of course, amongst Roman Catholics, Jesuits have the most training. So the idea was to basically just kind of buy them off as best they could and influence them. And
Then
the
you had Pope John the First, who dies kind of suspiciously. You had Roberto Calvi, and
yes, that relates to
that
Calvi
whole
and
bank.
the banking scandal.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, go ahead.
That's CIA and MI6 and
Yep.
Mossad all over it. There's no one else involved.
Now, the reason I'm bringing up David is because David, in this amazing chapter, links all these things. He's even going to mention Opus Dei, right? Now, he starts by talking about that he's a proud internationalist, right? He says that I'm a proud internationalist. I don't care. Yes, the conspiracy theorists say that I want an international government, and yes, I do. I'm proud of it. He says anybody who opposes me is a populist. He says I had no problem meeting with Castro, meeting with these big international organizations. We want there to be the extension of, in my view, they wanted to extend Americanism for a time period. And then I kind of think that what they wanted to do was, in a way, like that third way. They wanted to take the worst aspects of Western monopoly capitalism and the worst aspects of surveillance Soviet communism, smash them together in a dialectic, and then together this great reset seems to me to be a movement towards this third way world order. Is that what you think?
Yeah, and when you look at it, the history fleshes out how the robber barons who provided like the railroad infrastructure in Europe and in America, they get done. They get done at a certain point, and they go over and they outfit Russia, pre-Soviet Union. They outfit China, pre-communist revolution there. So the Western industrialists are behind those two communist experiments, and the purpose always was, this is how they're eventually going to take over America. They can have this other that they control and influence from behind the scenes, and have there's a whole lot of information to that, right down to Kim Philby.
That's right.
Right.
By the way, did you remember?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Let me stop real quick, because I just remembered. There's a section where Russell, he talks about the Bolshevik and other socialist experiments, that they're experiments to see if they worked, which has always led me to just kind of suspect that, what were they just doing, like simulations with? I mean, it was real.
Yeah.
But to see what would be the best method.
That's what they did with the Nazis. That was National Socialism. The Russians are international communism,
Yes, right.
and the Chinese are a mix of communism and capitalism. And they have slave labor, but they have like communist or capitalism at the top, but they have communism for everyone else. And it's like another experiment. And the idea was you surround America with these types, and then you can change our attitudes, values, behaviors, and beliefs through the schooling system generation by generation. And they did that. And that's what Charlotte Iserbyt and Porter Sargent and John Taylor Gatto and a whole bunch of people pointed out. Slowly over time, there's like more and more evidence to that. And they definitely did. And you check their documents, like the Rockefeller Foundation, what they did in the 50s, and they were doing back then with the Ford Foundation, like they're in with the Vatican and inclusive capitalism right now, and the Rothschild family. Yes. So they've all decloaked. They've said, we're working. Here's the agenda. And they just hope that they have enough wind in their sails that they can just get to the finish line without any opposition.
Yeah, it's a historical fact. The Rothschilds have been the papal bankers since the 1700s. That's public encyclopedia knowledge. Now, just to kind of recap everything that Richard's been talking about, in the section where David is talking about the CFR, he mentions his connections with the Dulles. By the way, David used to be in intelligence. He did intelligence work. He says at the beginning of this book, oh, yes, that's how I formed all of my powerful connections, was back when I was an intelligence asset. That allowed me to know everybody, and then I could basically just,
and Alan Dulles was Nelson Rockefeller's attorney that helped him invest in the Nazis and helped him smuggle Nazis. And Nixon went to Dulles and said, hey, I know your guy is helping the Nazis. And next thing you know, Dulles is helping Nixon go for president.
Well, and it's
vice
interesting
president.
David basically he basically just kind of hand waves all these ideologies in this chapter, and it's like Nazi, communist. It doesn't really matter to us. Right, like,
he's funded them all.
Yeah, exactly. We don't care, right? What's that?
Yeah.
You've seen Quantum of Solace, right? That
yeah.
Not that it's not the best Bond film, but it's very revelatory because the Mr. Green character is like, oh, we don't care who we work with. We'll work with the Nazi. We'll work with the communists, the socialists, the capitalists, whoever, as long as they, do what we want. Now, this is the chapter, by the way, where David talks about Bilderberg. And he says, yes, absolutely. I've always been involved in Bilderberg. Bilderberg was from the outset connected to Prince Bernhard. This is page 411. Etienne d'Avignon, all of these different elites of the Eurosphere. And he says that we helped set that up. There were people from Opus Dei. He mentions people from the Vatican involved on page 413, he says. So what we're talking about is not crazed conspiracy material. It's literally in, David's chapter on this stuff. It's not that hard to figure out. A lot of people won't go and read this stuff, but just to kind of make it all come back to what we've been talking about with gold and a standard of money that's solid. David says on page 417, he says that it was time we saw in the 70s for a new economic world order. And this is, so he says 1974. Now, that's a couple years after what? Leaving the gold standard, right? So we enter into this fiat the situation, and that's where David is saying, yes, this is a new global economic order. We're going to move out of a currency that's attached to something with limitations and meaning, and now we're going to transition into this the dollar as a global standard that's fiat, which is crazy. Now we're in the situation where we've got giant mass. I don't know what the debt was in the 70s, but I'm sure it wasn't what it is now, right? But that's the thing, and that's the thing that Quigley talks about in that middle. No, actually, it's the chapter on FDR. That was one of the most enlightening chapters where Quigley says that they had figured out that you can do this two-step move every decade or so, the elite bankers, where on the one hand, you move things towards privatization and freedom, and that allows the economic energy and surplus and profit to open up for 10 years. Then you can move the market then you step it over into communism, and that transfers the wealth to the centralized elite. And so you do this two-step move back and forth, bust, boom, cycle. And he says it's manipulated and engineered.
Yeah, it's like pistons firing in an engine, and it's like sowing seed and then reaping harvest. And that's what they're using people for, basically. They're tricking people out of their life, in ways that people can't even imagine, because you spent 15,000 hours forgetting all the stuff that you knew when you were 5 and would have naturally flourished had you not been indoctrinated.
Well, and so you're born into debt slavery, right? Everybody's born into this gigantic debt slave system. The things that you're told, as you pointed out with all your economics and education material is that you're a slave, and then you're taught to be more of a slave. Then you're taught to get $200,000 into school debt, all of which is totally retarded and nonsensical.
Yeah. And they want you to not ever have the chance to make your own decisions, have the opportunity to say yes to the things you want and say no to the things you don't want. And a lot of times it deals with knowledge and having money on hand to do those things. So it's a combination. And if you can apply your knowledge to provide value to other people, they will gladly exchange Federal Reserve notes, food, whatever you need, housing. If you're helping to solve big problems, people people pay money for two things. If you want to talk economics, they pay for results they want and don't have, and they pay to get rid of problems they have and don't want. So if you could just figure out what's my value, what's my offer, and do business with the world, you don't need a boss. You don't need the employee paycheck, golden handcuffs relationship. You can have upward mobility. And being able to put together an offer and a marketing plan to take care of whatever bills on your desk is a lot easier than saying, I got to get a third job. How am I going to work more? You can't get that from that. You can't get there from here. So you have to be able to change up your tactics and outgrow those types of problems that they're throwing at everybody right now. They're trying to get rid of small business, and that's the lifeblood of freedom. So if we can help small businesses stay in business and help people who are employed and, not, losing everything to the state, because they're going to come along. The IMF is going to come along. I'm pretty sure they're going to say, Jay, we're going to pay your debts. You got to take this shot. You got to sign up to your immunity system on subscription and come back to us for the rest of your life. But if you have a little money sitting there and you could say, no, thank you, please, maybe you got different options than the early adopters who are likely not going to get something they like.
By the way, shout out to the 726 live viewers that we have tonight with our good buddy Richard Grove, the excellent researcher, documentary film producer, author, and more. You can find his work at treasuringhope.com. I wanted to blow your mind here, perhaps you already know this. You're an astute man. But my buddy John hipped me to this obscure text that is a bunch of creeper weirdos from the late 70s, early 80s, including Carl Rogers, Jonas Salk, Tim Leary, Willis Harman, we know from the Changing Images of Man fame, Marilyn Ferguson, and many, many more weirdos. And there was this amazing chapter in this goofy 80s. Oh, this you see this?
Yeah, dude, that looks like you're great. Did you do the graphics for that cover?
Right, yeah, I did the rainbow flag was done by me. This 1981 book, and there's an amazing chapter from Willis Harman where he says, in the future, after we move past the boomer Protestant work ethic into the new ethic of today, and I'm mentioning this new ethic because this new ethic is going to be important for the first few chapters of Klaus's book. But our friend Willis says we're going to move into a new ethic where, get this, he wrote this in 1981. He says there will be essential and non-essential workers. He says the essential workers will be determined by a centralized managerial medical kind of technocratic insurance-based tyranny group. They will decide who's essential and not essential in society. The non-essential people will be put on a universal basic income. And he says they will work from home. They will have tiny houses. There will be austerity and collectivism. Yes. And he says it'll be like the Middle Ages when you were a serf. I mean,
it'll be worse. They had no surveillance.
Well,
yeah, they didn't have the surveillance, and back then you just planted the food and harvest the food. The rest of the time was pretty much yours.
He says we'll use Maslow's techniques, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, all that behaviorist conditioning. He says there'll be a new eco-ethic. Now, so that's 1981. Willis Harman, the guy who did Changing Images of Man. Fast forward to Klaus's book here, Shaping Fourth Industrial. The first 4 or 5 chapters, what does Klaus say? We're going to have a new covenant, a new ethic, and a new eco-ethic. So let's get to...
is Harman... I'm going to look up, see if Harman's in the index while you read that to me. Go ahead.
Right, so Klaus starts off by telling us, as you've heard me cover many times, we're going to have fair technology. Now, always be warned whenever you hear Bill Gates talking about what's fair. What's fair is, of course, what Microsoft's AI computers have determined through their new algorithms that I posted, we determined that the new algorithms have decided that basically all human beings should be converted into flesh machines. They should be made into flesh that will go into making my New Balance sneakers. So basically, you're going to be the flesh around that encases Bill Gates' beautiful feet as you are ground up to become ground up to become his New Balance. You're going to.
It's worse. He's making us into cryptocurrency. He's mining cryptocurrency out of human beings.
That's right. He says you're going to have wear a suit
patent.
that your body mod stuff mines the cryptocurrency. Isn't that what he says?
I don't. So what I saw was the patent from June of 2019, and it says in there there'll be a biological proof of labor. So when Klaus says at the appendix of Fourth Industrial Revolution that there'll be internalized technology, like pre-COVID, he said you'd have a cell phone in your body by 2025. With COVID, it's going to happen that much faster. So I read his books before, okay. Right? So they're going to expedite all this stuff. That's what Neuralink is. Right. It's basically like a cell phone. And so these things that they've wished to have done for a long time, and he even says, they state that here's the good things and bad things. And the good things, I don't believe them. And the bad things, that's understating them. So yeah, I mean, they aren't happy with creation. They don't think nature is good enough. Even though they don't understand nature, they're going to improve nature. Well, that's how I think we got in COVID in the first place. When you follow their research funding and you follow the people that wrote the fake Lancet article in January that just got caught, why would you fake that information so up front if it wasn't a smokescreen? And that was, it was called Eco Health. This guy, Peter Daszak, he wrote an article in January and attributed it to 27 scientists, and it got published in the British journal The Lancet, saying anyone who says there might be a lab origin to COVID is a conspiracy theorist and there's nothing to see here. But then you find out that from a FOIA that he wrote that, not the scientists, that he was logically the first place to investigate because his group took the NIH money from Fauci and did the work at Wuhan on the coronavirus that was specifically what leaked out. So there is a lot of smoke. That might be a smoking gun, but yeah, we'll see where that goes.
Now, as Klaus goes into describing this new ethic, the new green eco ethic, he says we're going to have to inculcate a new value system for children as they're brainwashed in the schools. He says that investing, when people go to invest, they're going to have this new ethic in how they invest. We're going to organize culture. And this will involve everybody's decision making. I was just wondering, do you think that this is this inclusive capitalism that Klaus is talking about here, where he talks about the new ethic of how we're going to even invest, how the monetary class, the class that has some wealth, how they're going to view themselves is going to be centered around this new eco ethic? How would you describe this phrase we're hearing now of inclusive capitalism that's now including the Vatican?
Well, the inclusive capitalism gang, they got together in 2013, made themselves known. It was E.L. Rothschild, Lynn Rothschild, Christine Lagarde from IMF, Prince Charles, and they said that they had 1/3 of the world's investable wealth in one room. So they said poverty is a problem, and we rich people should change the world to take care of poverty, so it's not a problem.
Well, if you get rid of people, there won't be poor people. That's the logic. Right?
Or if you just get rid of all the poor people and leave only the rich people, that's kind of what their plans also.
Then we won't have poverty, right?
Yeah, it kind of went underground for a while. You didn't hear much about it, but when Klaus had this fourth industrial revolution and shaping the fourth industrial revolution idea already, and this is basically like Agenda 21 and Technopoly wrapped together with transhumanism. Right. And then with COVID, they rebranded that the Great Reset, which they were already looking to do, and they just said now's a good time to do it, and they slapped that book together in June 2020, allegedly, and then they release it in July. And then they say, oh, we just created all this stuff because of COVID, but you can follow the paperwork back. Like I have the World Economic Forum, the first 40 years, building an international institution for public-private cooperation. Like they've been working on this, Klaus. So he's not a mastermind. He's somebody's lackey. He's like a working, he's not like the brilliant guy coming up with ideas. He's a useful idiot. He's like a facilitator, Renfield, of those people that want to make that power. And he's like, I will host a meeting at a ski resort. It was a good idea if you're on their side, Bilderberg is named after the hotel. Davos is named after the place where they have this. They now call it Davos, but originally it was just the World Economic Forum. And yeah, I mean, as a business plan, he was a young married guy. He's like, let's get a bunch of rich people together at a ski resort and do Dr. Evil type of stuff. And
even dresses like Dr. Evil.
Yeah, I think he does. He was a big fan of Austin Powers. And maybe he works for Spectre, but
well, yeah, he's definitely one of the Spectre's frontmen. I think what was the most interesting, of course, was the second half of the book where he goes into the integration of how everything has to be, basically the infrastructure has to be redone so that everything can be integrated. We're talking about Internet of Things. We're talking dates like 2030, 2050. Internet of Things will, through the satellites and through the 5G and through the nanotech and through the body mod stuff that we've been talking about, everything will be automated and tracked and traced, and the blockchain technology. And he says there will be a lend and rent circular economy. You want to comment on that and what that is?
Well, the circular economy is probably not going to be any economy you want to voluntarily participate in. And the things that they have in store for people, they're not friendly toward human beingness. It's almost like they're terraforming the planet for somebody else. Like they got to order, someone else is going to move in. They start painting the walls and like changing stuff before you move out.
Yeah.
And the landlord didn't tell you you're getting kicked out, but they got someone who's going to pay more rent. I don't know what these people are up to, but I do know that evil looks like people taking away other people's freedom systematically, either from occulting and hiding useful information or straight up poking them, spearing them, and shooting them into complying. Because the question is, all this stuff, Klaus, this sounds great. What happens if I resist? Oh, well, then you get the fine. What happens if I resist then? Oh, you get to put in the cage. What if happens if I resist that? Oh, we'll kill you. Okay, that's what I wanted to jump to. You guys are willing to use deadly force to force people into your agenda. That's the opposite of freedom. So if you kind of downstream their argument or upstream their argument Socratically, you can get to like, what are they trying to do? They're trying to disarm everybody. They're trying to control everybody. And in the midst of that is the surveillance. It's the harnessing and harvesting of our data to make products out of it. There's a lot to it. And it's not what most people are prepared to, because they're like taking the kids to school and they're doing their cubicle job and they're wearing their mask. And it's like everyone on TV, like to them, Fauci has to be the smartest person, because what would they do without somebody to tell them what to do on all these things?
Yeah. Now, it's funny because, Klaus tries to sell all this as really fun and cool, and it's going to be neat. And don't worry, we're going to have a nice ethic that the UN will come up with for everybody to submit to. But when I read UNESCO's whole ethic on the basis of Julian Huxley, it's all about killing everybody. So I think Klaus is betrayed when he mentions the fact that, the UN's going to come up with this new global ethic. And don't worry, you're going to be having fun because we're going to put you in the Matrix, and it'll be like Johnny Mnemonic, it'd be like Vanilla Sky and Lawnmower Man. Actually,
we will make it look super cool.
Don't worry. Really fun. Oh, no, actually, the whole thing is about you being a battery, like Neo is
in the Matrix, yeah.
Right? Because he says energy control is key, and you, as a human being, are basically just a walking battery for the elite to use. By the way, did you notice too geoengineering? That can't. He has a whole chapter. I thought that was a conspiracy theory. Oh no, there actually is a whole chapter on altering the climate, but. I think the most telling is that people are probably not going to go read the book, but you don't even have to. I did a 2-minute video based on Klaus's 2-minute video. Well, it was the World Economic Forum, but they did an 8-point thing of what was coming, and it was very open. It was from 2016, and actually they deleted it from Twitter because it went viral. But It was 8 points. It was you're not going to own anything. You'll be happy. There won't be any nation states. It'll be some kind of integrated federal global federation. You will have
Galactic Federation, they'll call it.
Did you notice the no meat thing?
Yeah, they have warehouses of grasshoppers and stuff they're going to grow for people.
Eat the bugs, right?
Yeah, eat the bugs. And then when they run out of bugs, Soylent Green is people, right? Oh, what's going on here? Oh, do you see that new Nicolas Cage dystopian movie where there's like it's in the future, the water's dirty, they're eating this powder, and then they find out it's basically people. Spoilers, sorry.
No.
But it's not a very good movie.
Yeah, but I watch even the bad.
I know you would. That's why I told you. It's like Nick Cage.
I particularly enjoy the bad Nick Cage films. They're some of my favorites. Neo-shamanic style. I'll have to watch that. When did it come out?
I think maybe in the last couple of years. I didn't see the whole thing, but he's seeing his
Somebody in the
family
chat
to
will know.
move them off the reservation, and they're going to go to a new Shangri-La place. But then they find out the people at Shangri-La are being turned into food.
Off the reservation.
Yeah.
Off the reservation. Well, did you want to enlighten us? What are we missing on Klaus? Anything else? We got a great audience. We're approaching up towards 800. Wow.
Woo!
Yeah, big crowd tonight. Thank you, everybody. Be sure and hit like and share. And if you want to send us those fat super chats, and me and Rich will answer those here in a little bit. What else do we need to know about Klaus that we're not hearing? Anything else?
He's not. Yeah, he's the most missed thing about Klaus is that he's a protege of Heinz Kissinger, and it's that Kissinger connection because, yeah. So Kissinger, one of the best books on Kissinger is called Dope Inc.
Yes.
By Executive Intelligence Review. And it shows how the East India Company British opium trade migrated through over to America, and Kissinger Associates might have had something to do with that at some point. I don't know, but it's very interesting and lends credibility to a whole bunch of other evidence that's out there, because there is a continuity. It does secret funding for black projects and the CIA, all that type of stuff. Always has, probably always will. And so the thing about Klaus is he's a front man for a bunch of other people that have had this plan, and he's just helping them plan the party. He's like a wedding choreographer, you know.
By the way, on that point, Lord of War, speaking of Nick Cage, is based on Victor Bout, if I recall. And Victor Bout is the international arms guy who was probably some kind of CIA asset. And my publisher, Trine Day, published Daniel Estelin's book, Shadow Masters, which covers the thing that you're talking about the drug lanes historically and the drug trade. I
was with Chris Milligan at High Times when I met Daniel Estelin for the first time.
Wow.
Yeah, say hi to him next time you talk, Chris. Yeah, he's a good dude. He's always been sending me books over the years, and that was always cool. Knowing somebody who runs a publishing company who can just be like, "Here's a box of books, check them out." Yeah, for sure. And about Klaus, I'd also keep an eye on Bill Gates. Like, there's a reason. Like, he's somebody's front man too. He's not the mastermind of anything. There's a reason he's got to go to work, and he's doing all the PR tour for this. Like, he's definitely the front man. He's not the mastermind. He's not a mastermind type of character. People want you to think he is, because he stole some other people's software over the years and did that thing, you know. But
interesting.
Yeah, the fact that he was being brought up on the antitrust, and then he created a nonprofit foundation just like Rockefeller did. Like, he fell in lockstep with the whole Rockefeller plan. Pardon my pun, but it wasn't intentional. Rockefeller lockstep.
I got you.
All right.
No, I'm just thinking about it. So I'm trying to think. So, well, we know that he comes from a family that was, you know, like a military industrial conflicts family, you know, the Planned Parenthood background. So there is some kind of lineage there, and I think there's big money was involved. Isn't he a trust fund kid? But
plus, he laughs when he's talking about this stuff, and all those vaccines that he's done all over the place, and the vaccine damage and experimentation he's done on India, and India's really got some grudge against Bill Gates for what he's done over there, and a lot of places in Africa too. It's just not told about it, you know, in the Western society. They don't talk about it. But Gates Foundation, Clinton Foundation, Bloomberg Foundation, all these nonprofit foundations, not just the Rockefeller and Ford and Carnegie, you know, those are the traditional globalist un-American activity foundations.
You know, it's interesting. Before this was all in the news, my godfather, Dean Arnold, had wrote a book about Ethiopia, and he has a whole chapter on Gil Bates and what went on in those countries. It's very fascinating. If you're interested in Ethiopia, my godfather's book has an excellent chapter on Gil Bates and his experiments. So, and we did that interview back in, I think, January or February, before a lot of this. Now, that was actually in the news about Gil Bates a long time ago, but more recently, Dean's book was pretty prophetic in terms of what we saw Mr. Gill doing in 2020. Richard, do you want to go ahead and do some of these super chats with me?
Yeah, let's do some super chats.
Before we do that,
we got.
Did we miss anything important you want to hit on?
My latest project is grandtheftworld.com. We do a live show every Sunday night, 9 p.m. Eastern. It usually goes for 4 or 5 hours. And for the past 2 years, I've been teaching a course. If schooling has left you with an earning ability, Then I teach a course called Autonomy, and the website is getautonomy.info/19 skills to see what skills you could have that schooling still not going to give you, and you can't get too many other places.
All right, I'll have to add those to the show description. Shannon Floyd, $5. I missed her super chat yesterday. Thank you, Shannon. We had a great show last night covering those goofy 90s blockbusters. A lot of programming and messages in those 90s blockbusters that I didn't catch until watching last night. Peter, for $5, says, Jay, are you planning on interviewing any of the still living global elites? Not necessarily to debate, but even an informed interview like you did with Alexander Dugin. I don't know of any of the elites that would do an interview with me. I was in contact with a TV producer who wanted to set up something like that, and he knew a few kind of academic elite people, but I don't think they're not really interested in that kind of a thing. I don't think they care. They don't care to dialogue with the plebes, right?
But if they come out with a new book and they're doing a book tour, they're press people.
That's true.
You could get on some of those people's list, I'm sure. Probably just not Kissinger's list.
No, I don't think. I'm trying to think of who we've covered that would even. I did get invited to do a couple of interviews with some of the psychonauts, so I could probably pull off maybe one of those kind of guys, like in the Tim Leary circles. But I don't know what would they want to talk about in common with me? Probably not much. Chunk, $11.10. Merry Christmas, brother. Well, Merry Christmas to you, Chunk. Are you the Chunk from the Goonies? I hope so.
Hey, you guys.
But now, actually, Chunk was Jewish, so does that mean Chunk is converted to Orthodoxy? I don't know.
I saw Chunk just the other day in a meme. He had just gotten vaccinated, and he said, hey, you guys, I'm doing fine.
And then he's mutated, right? No, wait. Chunk is the Tar.
No, you're right. Chunk was
Jewish
the kid.
guy.
Who was the other kid? You're talking about the Goonies. I'm talking, Chunk was the kid, and who was the other guy that, hey, you guys.
Oh, yeah, what's his name? I forget. The chat
Look at
will
us.
know. The chat knows all.
Yeah, thank you, chat, because that's something I deleted from my brain a long time ago to make useful
to make room
information.
for like the big books. J. Crew Bug for $10 says, is there any organized force on Earth that has prayerfully and successfully opposed the technocratic depopulating freaks? Well, in my view, the Orthodox Church is the best means of opposing it from a prayerful perspective. But technocracy, in the sense of where we are now, is pretty new. So I think there's going to be a lot more opposition in the future as people figure out what's going on. But I mean, since technocracy as an organized force is new, there's not really a historical precedent for how to combat it. But we do know that empires typically collapse due to being, bulky and hard to maintain. Richard, do you have any comment on the fate of empires?
Empires usually collapse under their own weight, but as far as how to deal with the technocracy, you don't want to be like, imagine if your electricity and that sort of nice stuff went away, could you still survive and thrive? And do you have food? Can you make heat? These sort of things. And if you have that ability, then use the technology, but they're going to hang people out at the dry and get them to give up their rights. Because when they take those things away, those people are going to become very dependent and begging and demanding, hey, I'll give up my guns to get some food for my family or whatever. Because Kissinger and these guys have written plans over the past 50 or 60 years to this effect, that they can control people through the food supply and how can they make these things happen. Just the same way they wrote up plans and said, what would it take to shut the world down? It would take a pandemic. And what kind of pandemic? It has to be a respiratory virus, and it has to be a novel coronavirus with these characteristics.
Yeah, lock stuff, right?
When they wrote that,
yeah.
well, this was the 2017 Pentagon pandemic planning document. But by the time they wrote that very specific prescription for global lockdown, they had already done the gain of function in science papers and got the thing that they wrote about in the paper.
That was the Wuhan lab place. Okay.
Yeah, and there's a couple other labs involved, but they lamented in their papers that the horseshoe bat coronavirus won't attach properly to the ACE2 receptor in humans, and so then they had to merge it through gain of function with the pangolin DNA to make it more easy on the uptake and spreadable and hideable. So pangolins don't see each other very often, and that's why the CoV-2 can incubate and hide asymptomatically, they say.
Well, that's why Alex every day talks about the gain. Folks, it's gain of function. Gain of function. Yeah.
I have the documents. We are the documents, ladies and gentlemen.
Detroyer, $5. Would you say that the elites are being fooled by fallen angels that do the devil's bidding through New Age rituals? I think that some of the elite believe in the darker esoteric stuff. Maybe not all of them. I think that people like David Rockefeller, as far as I could tell, was just an atheist. But definitely some of the elite do seem to take things like this very seriously. Some of the lackeys, like what's the Temple of Set guy that just died? Michael Aquino, I think he took his Satanism pretty seriously. There were people from the Temple of Set that were involved in the Club of Rome. So they I forget the guys. I think Maurice Strong was connected to some Temple of Set people. So some of these people, yes, they do take it serious. Not everybody, but does it really matter whether you're a Satanist who believes in depopulation or an atheist who believes in depopulation? They all believe the same thing, right? But I would say that from my perspective, anybody who does believe in those things ultimately is duped by Satan. Absolutely.
Yeah, and you could also just look at the whole thing as people who aren't thinking are going to get duped and be under control. And that Aristotle described the soul as your brain's capacity to have thoughts and to have dialectical thinking and these sort of things, to compare and contrast that which exists in objective reality to that which we perceive and are as subjective reality, and that the human experience is a mix of those two. And scientism wants you to believe it's all one thing. And there are some groups out there that want you to think it's, Hume, it's just all made up. And when I turn around, the door disappears or whatever. That's not, you can test your way through those types of things, right? So philosophy is something that is hugely useful in finding truth, and most philosophy, as it's taught in university, is done to obscure truth. I got an F in philosophy one time in college because the assignment was to write a paper. You had to fill up these books, write like 30 pages on why God doesn't exist, because my philosophy teacher was an atheist. And just because I was a cheeky type of dude, I was like, here's why God does exist. And I wrote a whole thesis and I took the F, and I was like, philosophy is not going to be my thing in the future. But then I found it on my own. I'm like, oh, this is a system of thinking so you can find reality and actually plan effectively for the future, which is, the reason capacity is what makes humans human. It's what differentiates us from the squirrels. But all along with that, the absence of reason also brings us self-pity and the loss of attitude of gratitude and these things. And those will kill human beings faster than a lot of other dangers in the world too. So we have this gap in our programming because we're not automatons. And that's where we have a choice to think or not to think. And by asking the question, we are thinking, because thinking starts with asking questions and finding answers from there. And if we end our sentences with declarative, here's a period, that's the absence of growing. That's not learning. That is under control. That's a stimulus reaction is being used as mind control every day by the status quo.
Amen. Wow. That was almost poetic, Richard.
Almost, though.
Tyler Bloyer. No, I'm not being cheeky. I'm being serious. I thought that was really good. Tyler Bloyer, $25. Let's get the Klaus accent going for the Illuminati. Is Klaus the real? Yeah, in a sense, yes. I mean, I don't think Klaus is at the top of the pyramid, but he's definitely one of those like up there, towards the apex frontmen type of people. Is there a Germanic, Swedish, Swiss-ish sort of Nazi background to Klaus? Is he one of these Prince Bernhard connected guys?
I don't know, but the fact that a guy with a German accent has plans for the world and nobody's saying anything about it, I'm like, wait a minute. Okay. And he looks like a Bond villain. I mean, he looks like
liberal,
straight out of
though,
Central.
It's okay. Like if you just say you're liberal, you can do anything, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much.
Well, I want to take over the world and kill everybody, but I'm liberal, so it's okay. Right?
We have to get one of these variables to zero. Says who and why? And what are you talking about? Everyone's just like, I'm like, no, that's a plan to kill people. That's a plan to kill people, what he set up on stage. And then the next time he did it, he's like, I just let mosquitoes go in here that can vaccinate you with our new thing. And it's like, how do you control the dosage on that? And whoa, what? That's as crazy as putting fluoride in the water.
Yeah, I mean, all of these people. I did a talk where I summarized the 10. I called it the 10 Commandments of the Global Elite, which was just at that time. I think I'd only done 45 of the elite books, but what are the 10 commonalities that they all share? And one of those 10 Commandments was, of course, obviously depopulation. There's not a single global elitist who will deny that, right? And there's others as well: an integrated, cashless global economic system. No borders, You could come up with 10 of these, right? But one of the first was definitely depopulation. So there's not a single global elitist that would deny the need to massively depopulate the world.
And you should, read like George Bernard Shaw and some of these other Fabian socialist eugenics people write about other races. And like Darwin's book, all those liberals, they love Darwin. Here's what I can't figure out. First off, liberal has to do with freedom. So I'm not going to call them liberals, but progressive leftists, right? The Democratic Party was controlled in the 1800s by in the Civil War period by August Belmont, who was the Rothschild front man in America. That was the party of slavery. They did not fund Lincoln. Lincoln had to print his own money, and then they had it before and they had it after, but they weren't working with Lincoln. They were supporting the Confederacy. So how do the people that are supposed to be anti-racism support the party of racism, right? There's a whole bunch of those contradictions that go on through time. And I'm like, if people just understood the history, they would probably act very differently in those situations. What was the specific one you asked about before I went on the Democratic committee thing?
I forgot.
That's good.
What were we talking about? We were talking about...
It doesn't matter. We can move on.
No, I got distracted.
I figure it's like a boomerang. If it's meant to, George Bernard Shaw and how they wrote about others. So Darwin's book was
the origin of species, the favored races. Yeah,
right. So and then the first, the Journal of Race Relations became Foreign Affairs, the Council on Foreign Relations publication. So Thorstein Veblen and these other eugenicists had, the Journal of Race Relations. It was very much looked at through race. They had an English-speaking people's idea, which is a very racist Anglo-Saxon rule the world type of idea that Cecil Rhodes was into. And they were, from every get-go, like they're about subjugating and showing how excellent they are to the tribal natives and with their, their pretty uniforms and all this stuff and glittery this, so they could subjugate, like they're professional subjugators. And it had to do with trade and black markets and masonry and religion and politics and economics. Like there's a whole bunch of layers to study about how the world works. But I think adults in this world who don't usually get the rites of passage should like give themselves the rites of passage so they know what's going on.
Yeah, and that's what we are here to do, both Richard and myself. We try to educate. And hopefully you guys are benefiting from that. I think so. We've seen a tremendous amount of growth in the last 4 or 5 years. So love you guys. Thank you all so much. Be sure and hit like and share. Coed Ben Haven says for $5, John D., Francis Bacon, and the Rosicrucians were allegedly some of the first spy networks from the British Crown that the British Crown worked with. Well, John D. was definitely a spy. I guess probably Richard or Francis Bacon was. And they do like to use those esoteric societies for spy networks, builders of empire, right? Why are these hermeticists always there? Well, from my vantage point, just a simple answer is that secret societies provide a great way to have and pass secrets. So there you go.
Yeah, and one of the secrets they pass is in Hermeticism, it's the idea of the golden the emerald tablet of I forget who. Anyway,
Hermes Trismegistus.
Yeah, Hermes Trismegistus and the emerald tablets, and it's not a real artifact, and it basically represents alchemy is changing not base metal, but your brain from lead into gold through a process of education, and then in the emerald tablet. I was thinking Mormonism with the golden tablet. The emerald tablet, it's this process of like putrefaction. So it's a methodology for building yourself over and over and over again. And the cycle completes itself in macro and micro aspects on a project or over a decade in your life, right? So knowing where you're at, like there's a curve to it. If you map those stages of alchemy internally, it looks like a learning curve. And so there's a part of every project where I feel like, why am I doing this? And I should quit and I'm never going to get this done or whatever. And I know if I persist past that and I get up, I'll start to see the benefits. So the Hermetic tradition was there to let people know where you are in this development process. So if you get discouraged, you remind yourself it's a phase. And when you look out for what the next phase is, so you can progress. And so it's like a spiral, like at a parking garage or a spiral staircase where it seems like the same process over and over, but you're at a different place in time space when that goes on. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Archimandrite Emilianos, $10. Is ALEX JONES a limited hangout or a deep operative, or is he altruistically well-intentioned and a Jesus lover? Well, I can tell you that I've watched and followed Alex since 2003. We spent the weekend with him, a couple weeks ago, and he is the person. When he's in person, he's the person that he is on air. He's no different. So I think Alex is a sincere guy. I've always thought he was a sincere person, and I don't have anything negative to say. I thought he was really cool, a lot of fun. I don't have any. I don't see anything that he's done that's that would lead me to think that. I mean, the level of sort of attack that he's undergone and censorship. I think that shows that he's legit. I think people overthink stuff and they think that, if you're attacked, the system is attacking you to show that you're legitimate. And it's like there's this never-ending spiral of how you can never prove or demonstrate that you're legitimate. I mean, but look, it's pretty simple, actually. If the whole establishment is attacking you, even if you don't have everything right, you're not an angel, you're not perfect, you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, let me say that I've watched Alex Jones from about that same time, because that's when I was starting to wake up into the world and ask questions. And he was the only one basically having a show on every day, interviewing people who have written books so I could kind of actively research. So big debt of gratitude to Alex for just being there. And for me, it's never been watching Alex. It's watching the guests on his show and looking at the news that's covered on the show, right? Because a lot of people have an allergy to him, you know? And I'm like, discard the messenger and look at the message inside the envelope, right? Don't worry about the postman. Look at the message in the envelope. That's where the value's at. And so over the years, there were times when I was like, I wish he would do this or that. But then I discovered, oh, that's my responsibility in the world. He's already working 100% and doing his thing. I should add to the conversation and do those things and bring it, you know. So that was good. Because I think if he just would have responded and done the thing, I might not have created stuff myself and gone to be like, somebody has to do this, you know? And by the time I met him in 2013, I was interviewed for State of Mind, The Psychology of Control, and then they lost their writer. And then they came to me and said, will you be our writer? Because you know about the whole topic. And I said, if I could write it with my friend, Kevin Cole. And they said, yes. So we did. And then the producers of that movie did a distribution deal with Alex. And we wrote the questions for Alex's interview that was the last one filmed for that movie. So when I went there in like June of 2013, we were down there for 3 days. Alex had just gotten back from Bilderberg. He was jet lagged, and yet he was at the office anyway. We shot a radio show segment. We shot some footage for the Obama deception. He was in the room asking me questions for the Obama deception. He kept falling asleep. And while I was answering a question, he would fall asleep. And I wasn't taking it personally. I knew this guy had jet lag. He hadn't slept. He's here trying to do this work. And that was like the 30 seconds he could close his eyes for a minute and be like, okay. So I was like, wow, this guy's legit. He's working his ass off. Everything I saw there, as far as all the people there, the highest caliber of integrity. I didn't see anyone there. It didn't seem qualified or I didn't see government spookiness. I didn't see things that couldn't be accounted for by his revenue streams. I didn't see anything that I would consider like untoward or like off-putting, right? So all the people there were pretty cool. Alex is definitely a force of nature, man. So when you were saying that, I was laughing.
He's a ball of energy.
I heard him. I was in like a little break room and I heard him in the hallway between, radio show breaks. He came out of the studio and he was roaring and I was like, oh shit. Yeah. He's down the hall. He's coming this way. And, he was very nice to us and we hit it off. And he said, this guy's really smart and we should have him back on. And that was like the kiss of death. That was it. That was never heard from him again.
Well, yeah.
So if he says that about you, get ready. No, I'm just kidding. He's a busy guy. I'm not on his radar. Wasn't looking to get on his radar. That was, so I don't, and then he went through all this stuff over the past couple of years. And so what I've noticed is he's lost his ability to articulate clearly and cogently the line of evidence that delineates from where people are to where he's at. And he now has people like Michael Malice there to be like, hold on, Tim, it's not so crazy. What Alex is saying is true. And what he's not able to say right now is this. And that's awesome because that's kind of what I saw that they needed back then was you have all these things you talk about on a regular basis. Let's get those pieces of evidence out there so the audience can start passing them around because that's currency with their friends and family. Right. So saying I have the documents and not having somebody on staff to be like, here's the document. Now tweet it to everybody.
Yeah,
right. But again, that's me saying that's how I would do it. So that's how I have to do it over here. I don't run InfoWars.
Well, the 4th hours that I've hosted have been great. I haven't had, nobody's told me what I can and can't say. So For me, it's been great, and I
Do
don't
you
have
use any of his supplements? Because I've used his supplements for a long time, and I was like super critical. I was like, these are probably bullshit, but I'm going to try it. And I was like, oh, that actually works. And so I was like, this is one of the best parts of that relationship of knowing about InfoWars was at some point he went and white labeled all the best things or got the best ingredients. And to this day, I still, even if I'm not watching the show, I'm still ordering some toothpaste or a couple other things.
Well, we
get
know
from
you
there.
have super male vitality running through your veins at the moment. Peter asked you, Richard, for $5. What are your thoughts on religion in terms of the New World Order? In other words, in terms of occultism, do you think they use this? What is the extent of its importance or lack thereof in terms of healing the world, in terms of Christianity? Do you have the same worldview as Jay does on religion?
I don't think anyone has the same worldview on religion, but I do see these people. They want you to not know yourself. They want you to not have a connection with your creator. And if there is such a thing, they want to define it. They want to manage it. They want to mediate it. And they want to drain any value out of it and take it for themselves and hide that from you. So really, all these occult secret societies, they couldn't have power if the average individual could come to know thyself without those mythologized proprietary rituals that Rosicrucians or Freemasons or the mysteries of Eleusis or whatever tradition has had in the past. So there's a lot more to it that they want you to know than they want you to know. I don't think that what goes on has been accurately described by anybody heretofore, and it has yet to be discovered. I think that whoever makes the first form and function discovery of how electricity works would make the most profound discovery in human history or the history of the universe, because it's how our hearts beat. It's how our brains receive consciousness into this meat space of matter. It's like the realm of creation. And these people, they're not even looking at that. They're looking at how to bastardize electricity. They're not interested in like actually understanding nature on the level of freedom. They want to do only things that are bastardizations to control creation, which is, that's leave it up to the good Lord to control creation. I don't need to be ruled by another man.
L7 MacDadu, $5 says, I'm always listening to you while I'm making my deliveries. Thank you for all this content. I have a quick question. Could you recuperate my natural God-given faculties over a couple years of... Could I recuperate natural God-given faculties over a couple years of homesteading in the far north Yukon, or is that absurd? I think a lot of people are turning to homesteading. I'm not a homesteader. We have a lot of people in our circles and in our networks who do it, who have a lot of success with it. I mean, I live in a small town, but I'm certainly not a homesteader. But I would imagine that if you wanted to get away from all the tech and had the ability to do it, that being out in the Yukon would probably be a rejuvenative process. Do you have any opinions, Richard, on that?
I talked to, there was somebody who called in to enroll to my autonomy course. And I said, where are you calling in from? And they said, White Horse, Yukon. And I said, geez, I know where the Yukon is. Like, where's that? They said 3 days north driving from Vancouver. So 3 driving days north to get their food. So I said, what's it like there? They said, it's a small city of 30,000 people in the middle of nowhere. And I said, how are the masks? They said, everyone's masked up. And I said, oh, people watch TV there. They're like, yeah. So it's, even though you go to the middle of nowhere and it's like Call of the Wild,
yeah.
Jack London type area, they're masked up. There's probably 5G, like all the things that people are moving away from. So you could literally get out in the woods and get, but that's not for the faint of heart. It's not for people who don't know the skills, unless you really have the moxie and you have a partner that's in for the win and they know what they're getting into with you. It can be done. It's a very different lifestyle. And I grew up cutting wood every weekend and chopping wood and stacking wood and, keeping ourselves warm with a wood burning stove. It's a lot of work. It's good to know how to do it though, for sure. Because if you don't know how to do that, you're always going to be dependent and you won't know the value of work and these sort of things. So
Peter for $5. How do we reverse Fabian socialism? How do we do our own long march through the institutions? If man's problem is spiritual, then what about, observing Vilfredo Pareto's 80-20 rule? How do we best manifest this and take action in the world? Well, that's going to depend on what your worldview, what your paradigm is. So around these parts, we take the spiritual to be the first thing, and then we look at the others, the geopolitical, the logical, all that stuff we see flowing from that. So could you take action in terms of the institutions? I mean, maybe at a local level. I'm not that interested in local politics, but maybe getting good people into local politics is a solution. I'm more of a deal with ideas kind of person. Richard, what do you think about the idea of getting people into local government type stuff?
I think people need to learn about themselves. They need to learn how to make their offer to the world. Then they need to learn how to assert their rights and stand their ground. And that might mean taking up a government position just so nobody else who's lesser worthy is taking it up to take your freedom. Because I think politics is other people talking about how to take away my freedom without me being present. I haven't voted since it was 2004. And the last guy I voted for was a libertarian candidate for president of these United States named Michael Badnarik, who's a constitutional scholar, who is now a graduate of my course. So I was thrilled that the person who kind of led me to not vote anymore, and the last time I voted was libertarian. It wasn't even for Bush or Kerry, because I couldn't vote for the Skull and Bones guys. I was like, there has to be another way. And then I basically discovered that, beyond that election, that we're like kids in the back of a car with a steering wheel, but it's not connected to the car that's actually driving down the road. We should act as if, so I'm not hoping that other electors are watching out to speak for me someplace. I try to speak for myself and not have them do too many things deleterious to my rights. But we're all in that situation where there's a lot of people who believe in that type of people made some agreements over here and it's binding to the rest of us without having to check with us. That's not contract. I took contract law for a while. There's 3 elements of a contract and they don't have them. So social contract and other things, like there's survival in the wilderness, and that's you and natural law. Natural law is like physics, right? And then there's your free will factor. So you in the wilderness is you with your free will, and the bear that doesn't speak English and won't reason with you, or the rain, or whatever you have to deal with. Now when you come into society, that's a different set of rules to work and play nicely with human beings without bludgeoning and killing each other, right? And it took a long time to get to a point like that. So there are certain social conventions that when you're in polite company, you do these things. But if you were in the wilderness, no such things exist, right? And a lot of people don't know how to take care of themselves in that solitude position. So they're not very good at getting along with other people or getting their needs met easily in modern society positions.
Luthien for $5 says, I think video games are something that the elites keep a close eye on. They will be using video games as a means to distract the masses. Well, yeah, they're definitely doing that. They will push to make streaming video games and internet free so that the masses will invest their entire free time into this. Well, actually, Klaus has a whole section on the virtual world, virtual entertainment. Jacques Attali said in 2006 that would be the future and the norm by 2020. But so I think that you're absolutely right to project that into the future, Luthien. Richard, what about video games and virtual entertainment?
I think they have used them for pre-programming, putting you through scenarios so you'll react in a predisposition that they approve of ahead of time. But I think what the next part is that leads right into the Matrix, man. Mm-hmm. Human batteries hooked up to virtual reality. Mm-hmm. They can let the world whatever is going on. They'll tell you whatever. You can't leave your house. It has to be virtual. And that's why they want 5G. That's why they need these faster transfer speeds. We don't need them to watch Netflix, everybody. They have another agenda, and what they need to go build out the tech for the next level. And then they install that, then they can slowly go into it. It's like Ready Player One at the beginning, where he lives in like Cleveland of 2035, and it's all like dilapidated, junkyard, right. And everybody digs into their VR because it's better than their reality.
Yes.
Or what's the Bruce Willis movie, Surrogates?
Surrogates, yes, exactly.
Same thing. So these people have been envisioning how to do this to us, and I say that's fine. Kurzweil, you want your singularity, you want to be forever in the computer. Go ahead, get in the computer. I'll maintain it. I'll make sure there's electricity going to that. I'll be the one who stays here, and I'll just kick the cord out. Yeah. We'll be all set.
Go have sex with dragons in the virtual world, like we all know you want to do. We'll provide you the energy for that. Mr. Random for $10. I'm loving this live stream, guys. You have touched on many, many important topics. Jay, are you still working on a book about the global elite authors? Well, I'm trying to finish the book that relates to the Western conceptions of God. And that is taking forever because I keep finding new sources, and I feel like if I don't keep getting the proper sources, the book will be deficient. So I'm in this stuck in this loop where I keep getting more and more sources, and I'm having to read those sources. It's taking me forever. But I'm reading papers every day, chapters, books, constantly. So I don't know. But I did talk to the publisher, to Chris, about a book based on the global elites books, and he said that it's a great idea. It's just I have to do it. So, but thank you, Mr. Random. Peter, for $5. Have you watched Dan Pena's video on global warming as a scam? I watched a documentary like 10 years ago on it being a scam. I don't know who Dan Pena is. He says it's highly relevant. Why do banks donate green, then go and loan mortgages on waterfront property in Miami, London, with no disclaimers of global flooding in the next decade? Yeah, exactly. You would think that if they really believed in, that Florida is going to be underwater,
that's how they can afford it. They float those scams. And so I know who Dan Pena is. I'm not familiar with that exact conversation, but I'm familiar with the concept and why he would know, because he used to work with the guys that were setting it up, Maurice Strong and those other guys, those World Economic Forum type of clients that Dan Pena had in the 90s to make his bones in the first place. The other aspect is I don't know that Pena knows I don't know that he knows the history we're talking about. So he might have seen like global warming versus global governance, or, he knows the history of the people he was working with, but I don't think he's like done the homework and read the books. He doesn't seem like that type of guy. He just, was at a couple of these events and he's like, oh yeah, these guys are doing it. So it's a wealth and property redistribution scam, and to choke out their competition with unfavorable taxes while they remain exempt with their tax-free foundations. And, they got a plan. They got some tools. They're going to keep using those until we figure out how to take them away.
Yes. Peter says for $1, Richard, would you upload your podcast to iTunes? It's the easiest way for me to hear them.
My podcast is on iTunes as the Peace Revolution podcast, and then the Grand Theft World podcast will soon be on either one of those iTunes streams. So there's 2 Peace Revolution streams on iTunes. Grand Theft World will be added to it. And right now there's an RSS, and it's hosted on various video platforms. And sometimes when it's allowed on YouTube, it's there too.
Peter says again for $5, you would be surprised how easy it is to get a hold of some of these elites. Brian Rose from London Real just blasts out mass emails for guest interviews. It's just a numbers game. Yes, I have gotten into contact with, not elite, but like, kind of celebrity type people through you just wait until they're, like Richard says, they're putting out a book, and then they're usually pretty, willing to go on and promote the books, even if they don't know who you are. Like, they might hop on, but I don't know. We'll see about it. I'll think about who might be good to do. Master Ninja, $10. Master Ninja. I hope Master Ninja is a chick, but Master Ninja says, Richard, let's get married. So I think Richard already has.
Yeah. 17 or 18 years. My wife and I. We're good.
Sorry, Master Ninja, but I will take your $10. LD, $10. What are your plans to safeguard your work as censors are ramping up? Well, I have a website. I have my material archived there. I have everything backed up. I have backup places where the material is. But beyond that, I don't really know what else. I mean, I don't have the ability to constantly just be backing everything up. So, that's why I have the subscription service in case this all goes down. Everything is at my website. Richard has his own, sources and site as places that his materials source as well. So beyond that, I don't really know what else to do. What else can you do other than source your own material, right?
Yeah, there's a couple different layers. I mean, there's your average like hosting where they could just take it down, and then there's new types of hosting like interplanetary file sharing system (IPFS), where you could put it up on a URL or a number. Basically, it's like a URL, and it's there, and it's uncensorable, and it could be there, and it's like a BitTorrent type of technology for websites and content like what we are putting out. And then the other end of that is to be able to upload once to an IPFS server and then have it distribute to YouTube and Rockfin and Patreon and all the other places that we content loaders struggle to upload with. BitChute, how many times things crash going there. And having that automated so I can just focus more time on producing and live streaming, and not so much like struggling to get the content out there afterwards. And so one of our clients, it's called Content Safe, and contentsafe.co is where they're just they're doing the beta right now. They have early adopting clients. So for people in the freedom and liberty community that are doing what we're doing, they're getting their data backed up and the content set up so they can distribute. And that's a step in the right direction, because then it lets people like us produce more and get more content out there without having to do all the hassles of the dissemination.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than like jumping through the hoops of constantly, because when you get to the point where you've got 900 to 1,000 videos, hundreds of essays, like to re-upload all of that is like a huge process. So, you know.
Yeah, they can do it like not overnight, but in a couple days.
Right.
So they've taken everything from like Vimeo and put it on BitChute, or now they're taking it to Rockfin. But that's a very useful service that I never would have had time to do it myself.
Yeah, good to be the king for $30. Good to be the king. We was kings for $30 says you should both get together like this on the regular. This is a phenomenal cast, a cast of two, but a great cast nonetheless. I agree. It's always a great interview when we talk to Richard.
Every 5 years we do this.
Every 5 years. Well, actually, you had me on your thing.
History, so it doesn't repeat.
We did have a deep dive where I was on with you.
That was the deep end. That's what it was. Yeah, you're on the deep end. Yeah.
But yeah, we do need to do this on the regular, but much appreciated. Good to be the Kang for that $30 fat super chat. Xavier for $1 says, what are your opinions on the Georgia Guidestones? How can I join your Discord? If you go follow me on Twitter, we usually share the Discord link pretty often. We have right at 4,800 right now, so we're almost at 5K in the Discord. Big group, a lot of great smart guys in there, a lot of scholars in there. But if you follow me on Twitter, it'll usually be shared at least once a week. Xavier, if you don't follow me on Twitter, you can still go to Twitter and just find my feed, and you can find the latest share. Also, I think we are listed in the Discord directory because we are the largest Orthodox group on Discord, so you can find it that way as well. But what do I think of the Georgia Guidestones? I mean, well, you said the Georgia Stones. I assume you don't mean like people's kidney stones or like something like that from Georgia, but the Georgia Guidestones. They are monuments to depopulation. I've always assumed it was probably Ted Turner. Do you have any comment on that, Richard?
I also think it's probably Ted Turner and it's Rosicrucian. So there's that history to it. It's somebody's wish list. It's wishful thinking. It's put there to be a PR piece, to be like, hey, we're going here. And it's supposed to be a mystery until it's not. That's how those people put their stuff out there. It's for those with eyes to see and ears to hear, as the secret society folks would say.
Dency Diaz for $10. I can't wait until I use my Bitcoin to buy a hologram porn star while I'm on my super male vitality. Well, as long as your hologram porn star looks like either myself, Richard, or Alex Jones, I will support that moral dilemma. I will support your degeneracy in that regard. Vatican Catholic, $10. This is not the real cult, Vatican Catholic. Why won't you debate me? John said, God is love, absolute divine simplicity. Brah, you're scared of me. By the way, I am one of the true witnesses of Revelation. Anyway, Jay, look into Theta TV and the Theta token. I have looked into the altcoins. I've gambled with altcoins quite a bit in 2020. And I have converted to Bitcoin maximalist, so I'm not interested in the altcoins anymore. But I appreciate your promotion. I will look at Theta. Way more interesting than Bitcoin. I don't really care if it's more interesting than Bitcoin, because I think that we're at the point where Bitcoin is going to be there for the long haul. It's the best bet. Does that mean it's infallible? No. Anything can happen. But it's, I think, there for the long haul. Richard, do you have any opinion on altcoins or other types of coins, or do you kind of just have a skeptical attitude of all of it? Are you a gold bug?
I don't believe in paper money. So I try to diversify, and I don't believe in the stock market. So it only leaves you a couple options. As far as altcoins, I'm not involved or knowledgeable in anything the last 6 months or a year. I kind of lost interest in that area. And as far as Bitcoin, yeah, the way they have that set up, that, a coin could be worth 100 million and not too far in the future. So I'm not saying that like to buy Bitcoin. I'm just saying they set it up as there's only 21 million Bitcoins ever, and they only generate them this way, and they get to be more valuable. And somebody else start, like if India or China start standardizing on that type of thing, it could go real quick. So you don't need a big piece, but maybe a little piece. And I know it's not 10 years ago, but it's not 10 years from now.
Right. Exactly.
So, you know,
exactly. Peter, $5.
don't buy coffee. Don't use it to buy coffee. Let me say that.
Yeah.
Not bumper stickers for sure.
Peter for $5. I know Dan Pena personally. He does not read. He is looking. He is hooked into the elite and does know a lot of the stuff that goes on. The video of him on global warming has millions of views on YouTube. Sean Hannity was just talking about it. I highly recommend everyone watching it. Thank you, Peter. I will definitely check it out. I've not heard of this. Archimandrite Emilianos for $5. Jay, does your new wife put up with you being such a belligerent know-it-all? Yes, and she knew that all along. So
that was the
she
qualification.
knew that I was a know-it-all. That's meta, but yes. Peter for $5. Thoughts on Trump and Biden and how multiple event paths of the election could play out. I think it's looking like, there's not a whole lot of possibility of Trump pulling that off. So I think we're going to have Biden. And I think that Biden has committed himself to multi-billion-dollar stimulus packages, bailouts, money printing stimulus. So I think you want to look at the hedges for against inflation. So you can figure out what those hedges would be in terms of inflation. So Richard, any ideas of what a more socialized approach of Biden is going to bring us?
The World Economic Forum and Bill Gates and these guys would have been good with Trump or Biden. Either way, they've already said statements how if Trump won, they'd be fine. And Biden, he's spoken there and he's friends with Klaus and he's on board and he's CFR and so they're just full steam ahead. That's all.
Full steam ahead. All right, that's all I see in the super chats. If you want your last super chat, you better get it in quick because every time I close the show, there's a super chat at the end and it doesn't get read until the next live stream. But Richard, awesome interview. Everybody says it's one of the best we've done here. I think it was really informative. Everybody be sure and follow Richard on Twitter. He's Richard Grove, trageandhope.com. And then the other two sites that you said, you've got a couple things. There's Grand Theft World podcast. And what was the other one?
GrandTheftWorld.com. And then the other one, if you want skills to level up your game, it's getautonomy.info/19 skills. And you can spell it out or write 19 skills. Either way, you'll get the PDF.
Awesome. Thank you very much for coming on, dude. It was awesome.
Thanks, Jay, for having a platform like this. You've come a long way, man. And I remember when I was talking to you like years ago and you're like, hey, I kind of want to do. And I'm like, you have the aptitude and here's how to do it. And then you took off.
Positive influence. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, thank you for making content that I enjoy tuning into. I tune into a lot of my colleagues, but man, you got a deep brain. You're always reading. I'm always learning from you. I'm not just hearing you. You know what I'm saying?
Ditto, bro. Thank you very much. And we will talk very soon. Hopefully it won't be another long stint between interviews, but let's talk again soon. Record night tonight for just a random interview. I think we had almost 800 live tonight. That's